Hello and welcome. I am Chilling Tales, and as you get ready for bed, you must know that you are doing amazing and you deserve all the sleep you can get. So as you are winding down, let me know where you are from and what time you are watching this video. Like and subscribe to help the channel if you'd like. Now, put your mind at ease and let the story unfold. The hospital wasn't on the map. It wasn't on the green highway sign either. It wasn't on the list of plausible places my brain offered me when the rain turned to sleet and the radio fizzled into a blanket of polite static. It was simply there when my headlights finally took pity and found something to reveal. A long, low building with a curved drive, two wings like tired arms spread for an embrace, letters over the entrance that had once been proud and were now only legible because light insisted. S-Team, Vitas Community Hospital. The word community had lost its middle letters, so it read Com Any Tai, which felt honest in a way I didn't appreciate. I pulled into the horseshoe, tires slipping once, twice, then catching. The automatic doors stuttered and opened, letting a wash of warm air out that smelled like bleach and something sweet, pretending to be citrus. No cars in the main lot, no ambulances, just my sedan, steaming a tired fog into the night, and the long dark of the hill the hospital clung to, and the sense that I had been invited by name without anyone asking my permission to have a name. I told myself it was practical. The sleet had thickened. My phone's battery was at 9% and sinking faster every time I woke the screen to watch the blue dot twitch on a grayed-out map. The next town had been 40 miles back, the next gas 50, and the road ahead bent into a black I no longer trusted. I grabbed my bag, locked the car out of habit I couldn't defend, and stepped into the fluorescent hum. The lobby was not quite empty. A woman sat behind the desk, hands folded on a clipboard, hair gathered into a bun, so neat it looked like it had been drawn there. Her name tag said R. Delaney, in letters that tried to be brave. The clock on the wall read 1:14. The second hand did not move. From somewhere else in the building came the mechanical sigh of a vent that had learned to sound like patience. Evening, the woman said. Rough weather. I got turned around, I said, which was a generous way of saying I had lost the argument with a road that had stopped answering questions. Is this place open? We're always open, she said, with the particular softness of someone who has practiced a sentence until the corners no longer cut. How can we help you tonight? I just need a place to wait out the storm, maybe charge my phone. Do you? I gestured vaguely at the emptiness behind me. Do you take visitors? We take everyone, Delaney said. Let me get you a cup of something warm. I can pay you for. We don't bill the weather, she said, and stood. The way she moved had thrift in it, like all her motions had been budgeted in advance, and she would not go over. She disappeared through a swinging door and returned with a paper cup whose lid was pressed on so neatly I was sure it belonged to someone else. Tea, she said. Chamomile. It's easier on the house at this hour. I took the cup because it was warm and because her hands looked like they would be disappointed if I didn't. The heat made the cold around my fingers realize there were options. We can set you up in the family lounge, she said, or if you prefer a quieter space, Ward C has a waiting area with lights you can dim. Whichever is closest, I said. She nodded, made a note on the clipboard with a pen that wrote as finely as a needle, and placed a visitor sticker on the desk. Visitor, it said in black letters, with a faint gray bar beneath where one might write a name. She didn't. Neither did I. This way, she said. The halls did what halls do, survived. Beige painted cinder block, scuffed where carts had learned corners, posters preaching hand washing in fonts that belonged to 2008, a bulletin board with outdated shifts for nurses, whose names were strong and generous and underpaid. We passed a vending machine that hummed to itself and glowed with candy bars that looked embalmed. We passed a glass case with a plaque about the hospital's founding, 1956. A local philanthropist with a brick company had donated both funds and literal bricks. A black and white photo showed a ribbon cutting with small boys in identical haircuts and short pants that knew they were ridiculous. We passed doors labeled radiology and diagnostics and respite in block print that might have been from the same hand that had written on my visitor sticker. Delaney's shoes made no sound. Mine squeaked once, and then chastened, chose silence. Storms push people onto us, she said over her shoulder, as if I had asked. They push other things too, names we haven't heard in a while. After midnight, the building likes to remember its old rehearsals. We don't mind company then. I don't want to be trouble, I said, because my mother raised me to believe that was a reasonable ambition. You're not, she said. You're a chart waiting for ink. The hall kinked left in a way the architecture did not apologize for. A sign on the ceiling pointed us toward Ward C in a font that believed letters were machines. The tea warmed my throat and the back of my eyes, and the part of me that had been clenched around the steering wheel all night began to consider releasing the hostage. Ward C's waiting area had 2 couches with floral upholstery that had decided to be brave in the face of fluorescent lights. A television in the corner showed a muted loop of a cooking show where hands whisked and chopped and sautéed the same onions into the same brown again and again. A fish tank held no fish, only a castle with a broken turret and a current strong enough to keep imaginary tales busy. The clock above the double doors read 1:14. The second hand here did move, a stuttering flit that didn't advance the minute. You can sit, Delaney said, and the sentence felt like permission to put my bones down where the building could inventory them. There are outlets. Thank you, I said, and meant the thank. Do you need anything else? The question was ordinary, but the way she asked it wasn't. It had a carefulness in it, a precision, as if the wrong answer might add a wing to the building. I'm okay, I said. Actually, do you have a map I could take for in the morning? Maps are for places that stay still, she said. The road will be friendlier when it remembers you. For now, rest. I sat. She left, her shoes still unwilling to coin sound. The tea's heat sank into my thumb joint, the one that had been complaining for 6 months and telling me I was older than I kept choosing not to be. I plugged my phone in and watched the percentage crawl upward and felt the petty relief of a number doing a thing it could prove. The waiting area held the particular silence of places that only tell the truth, because the noise has been canceled out. Somewhere down the hall, a machine beeped its measured beep, then another answered at exactly the same interval, as if agreeing with a thesis they'd both read. I dozed, not a decision but a sudden kindness. In the doze, the hospital walked the halls for me. I was both in my body and in the floor. I felt wheels pass and breath move, and the sigh of heat in a duct, and the click as a door remembered to latch. I felt the weight of the building's own memory pressing down from the ceiling. Faces passed, not hovering, not threatening, just existing with the persistence of people who'd had to learn to be boring to survive. When I woke, a blanket had been put over my shoulders. I hadn't brought a blanket. It smelled faintly of starch, faintly of the storage closet, embarrassed by its own complicated shelves. My phone showed 1:14 and 63% battery, and the carrier name had changed to Edmonton. The fish castle's broken turret leaned a fraction farther than it had before. A man sat across from me, thin in the way that says either runner or patient or both. His paper wristband had a barcode and no name. He watched the mute cooking show with the attention of someone who either loved or hated onions. Hi, I said, because my voice needed to practice being a voice again. He glanced over and smiled, the way a person smiles when they've been waiting to be asked whether they are all right, and already decided the answer will make everyone more tired. You knew, he said. Storm, I said. Car was done being brave. They're letting me stay until the road stops sulking. He nodded. Road's a child up here, throws tantrums for attention. He lifted his wristband and shook it, and the plastic made a sound like a small bird complaining. Do they let you pick what it says? I asked, because some questions are more about the asking. No, he said. He tapped the blank space where a name might belong. Sometimes they fill it in later, after the intake. Sometimes they don't. Depends on the nurse. Which nurse? Whichever one is on. He turned the volume up 2 clicks with the remote, and the cooking show offered the sound of onions sighing into hot oil. A sound so convincing, I checked to see if the hospital itself had learned to sauté. They have me on observation, he said. Observation of what? Me, he said cheerfully. Then the cheer thinned into honesty. Whatever I am when I'm here, it's different from what I am when I'm not. How long have you been here? He made a face like arithmetic had been suggested in poor taste. Long enough to know that the first answer to any question in this building shouldn't be a number. What should it be? A location, he said, or a color, or a smell. He pointed to the fish tank. That is cleaner lemon after mopping. The hallway is warm duct iron. The beds are paper and embarrassment. You learn the hospital by nose. That way when the lights flicker or the clocks stop, you still know where you are. The clocks have stopped, I said. Yes, he said. There are other clocks. A nurse appeared in the hall, her scrubs the kind of blue someone once decided meant medical. She had the deliberate stride of a person who had discovered a speed that kept panic behind her and expectations in front. Her badge flipped as she moved, and when it righted itself, I read the name, ARAO. Her hair was braided into a rope that meant business. She saw me and changed course as if she had meant to be here all along. You're our storm traveler, she said. Her voice was low and precise, a little sanded at the edges. R. Delaney said you might need a warm place to be a person. I'm all right, I said. Tea helped. I can go if you need the chairs. We need people to practice being kind on, she said. The chairs forgive us for the rest. She looked at the man across from me. Carter, have you slept? Define slept, he said. More than an hour with your eyes closed and your jaw unclenched. I've been vibrating with intent, he said, and grinned. The grin didn't quite reach anything it should have. I'll crash later, crash now, she said mildly, and touched 2 fingers to his impulse to be stubborn. He did what I would not have expected. He stood obediently, like a deflated kite remembering ground, and followed her down the hall. Be right back, he said to me. They have to write down that I am still here. A census, I said. A confirmation, he said, and vanished around a corner that made the building a question mark. I sat with my blanket and my tea and watched the cooking show. Hands never burn themselves. At some point, somewhere else, a door opened. Air changed. Not colder, not warmer. The tiny shift you feel when a system admits a new variable. The overhead light clicked just once, the way lights do when you want to remember they are doing you a favor. I took the cup lid off to drink the last of the tea and saw a ring of words printed inside the cardboard. A manufacturer's code, maybe, for your comfort. The font was too friendly to credit. I put the lid back on. An older man walked by wearing a gown, socks with the rubber dots on the bottom, and the particular dignity of someone who is elected to accept what they cannot control. He paused when he saw me. Which way is X-ray now? He asked. They keep moving it. I have no idea, I said, but I could walk with you until a sign decides to tell the truth. He considered that like a doctor reading a chart. No, he said. If it's not where it was, it will be where it is. That's the trouble with everything, I said, and he barked a delighted laugh and shuffled on. When Nurse Rao came back, she looked like the person who had been expected and had lived up to it. You have a place to be in the morning? She asked. Somewhere to go? Yes, I lied, then corrected myself out of respect for the fluorescent lights. I had one before the storm. It has not been making its case convincingly. We can call you a cab, she said. If the road allows, my car is out front. Cars are stubborn, she said. They believe in themselves when they should listen to weather. Are you open? I asked, and realized I was asking a question about metaphysics and hours. Always, she said, with that same sanded edge Delaney had given to the word. Sometimes we are open for admittance, sometimes for witness, sometimes for surrender. Tonight we are open for rest, and in the morning we'll be open for what the morning decides to mean. A chime sounded, gentle, like an apology. She glanced at the ceiling, at nothing I could see, and nodded. Census, she said. Do you mind if I make a note you're here? What does it do? It tells the building, she said simply, and held up a small tablet whose screen was cracked along one corner like a smile. My name sat at the top of a form I had not filled out. My full name, first and last, spelled correctly. Beneath it, fields labeled addresses and insurance and known allergies were blank. A section reading admitting diagnosis had 2 words already filled, weather related. I didn't tell anyone my name, I said. No, she agreed, but you didn't decide to be someone else either. That seems like a trick. We're full of tricks, she said, not unkind. Shall I leave it blank? The question did not feel rhetorical. I thought of the road like a throat-swallowing sleet, of the blue dot that would not pick a lane on the map, of the way the hospital's warm air had felt like forgiveness when the doors sighed open. I thought of being somewhere with a clear answer, if only for the length of a cup of tea. You can write that I'm here, I said, but not for long. No one is, she said. Her fingers moved, and the screen made a soft sound like a breath laid down. The overhead light clicked again, twice, in sequence. The building is pleased, she said. It likes names. It promises not to keep them. Promises are expensive, I said. We have a grant, Nurse Rao said gravely. I laughed because my chest needed to remember it could. In the minute after, the hallway filled with a quiet parade. A woman pushing a cart with clean sheets piled high. A man in maintenance rolling a ladder whose wheels whispered. A doctor in a white coat, too new to belong to a place this old, his expression far away, as if he'd been asked to carry something delicate from one end of a thought to the other. None of them made the noise humans usually make. The building swallowed footfalls and conversation, chewed them down to a hum that did not disturb. The tea was gone. My hands were warm. My eyelids had found a weight that was not a burden. If you lie down, Nurse Rao said, we can drape you with kindness and call it protocol. Is that what you call sleep? When people allow it, she said. Some refuse. Why? Control, she said, or guilt, or it's simply not their turn. We try not to be offended. I could use a turn, I admitted. She nodded once, left and returned with another blanket and a pillow that had learned to be square but not proud. If you dream, she said, let the building have the extra. Leftovers are how we keep the night polite. What if I dream something I need? You'll keep it, she said. You'll know because it will fit when you wake. I shifted on the couch and felt the exact moment my back forgave me. The ceiling tiles looked like a map only the janitor understood. The television had moved on to a different episode and was teaching a pot of water how to believe in a simmer. Somewhere, the mechanical sigh of a vent decided to sound more like breath, so I wouldn't feel lonely. I closed my eyes. The building folded a corner of the night for me, like a nurse folding a napkin into a crane. The last thing I saw through my lashes was the waiting room clock, deciding very slowly how to turn from 1:14 into 1:15. It took its time. I did not argue. Pranapurabekins when I woke. The waiting room was darker than it should have been. The television in the corner had gone black. its screen reflecting only the faint glow of the fish tank's motor. The cooking show had ended without ceremony, leaving silence to practice on its own. I sat up, the blanket sliding into my lap, and realized I had no sense of how long I'd been asleep. My phone read 1:14, battery at 100%, notifications blank, carrier still admitted. The clock on the wall also read 1:14, second hand shivering forward and back like a pulse without a vein. The hallway beyond the double doors was empty, the kind of empty that is chosen to be deliberate. I rubbed my face and told myself it was the storm, the exhaustion, the tea working its slow way through me, but my skin felt too warm, flushed as if I'd been under observation lights. When I stood, the blanket slipped to the floor. The air smelled faintly different now, less of bleach and lemon, more of iron left out in the rain. I bent, picked the blanket up, folded it out of habit. That's when I saw the file on the table by the couches, a manila folder. No dust, no age, just sitting there as if it had been waiting until I opened my eyes. It had my name on the tab, first and last, printed neatly in black marker. I opened it. Inside were forms, dozens of them, each stamped with the hospital's crest. Patient intake, medical history, consent for treatment. The blanks had been filled in, my handwriting, or something close enough to it to make me doubt my memory. Address correct. Emergency contact. My sister, whose number I hadn't given anyone here. Allergies listed in the same order. I recited them at checkups. And at the top, under presenting complaint, 3 words: loss of direction. A sound in the hall made me snap the folder shut. Footsteps, steady, measured, not hurrying. A figure moved past the glass, tall, in a coat that reached his knees. Doctor, I thought, though the thought felt supplied rather than earned. He didn't look in, didn't acknowledge me, just walked on, his shadow lengthening across the frosted glass until it faded into the next bend of hallway. I slipped the folder into my bag because leaving it behind felt like leaving proof. The vending machine hummed louder, or maybe I was just listening harder. The lights above it flickered once, brightened, then dimmed to a softer glow, as if the hospital were lowering its voice to encourage me to do the same. I walked to the doors and pressed the bar. They opened with a sigh like tired lungs. The corridor stretched away in both directions, more endless than before. Signs on the ceiling pointed toward radiology one way, surgery the other. The air felt warmer down the surgical hall, cooler down the other. I took the cooler path because the heat on my skin already felt borrowed. I passed doors marked with room numbers, all shut. A faint buzzing came from one, like a fluorescent tube thinking about its obligations. From another, I heard a rustle of sheets, a cough, then silence so sharp it made me stop. I leaned closer, ear to the wood. Nothing, just the dry smell of sheets pressed flat too long. I stepped back, continued. The corridor curved, as if unwilling to admit it had an end. At last I found a door marked records. The handle turned easily. Inside, shelves stretched floor to ceiling, metal painted battleship gray, lined with folders identical to the one I had found. Alphabetical, neat. A rolling ladder leaned against one shelf, wheels locked as if daring me to try. I moved along the aisle until I found the section with my letter. My folder was already there. The one I had taken sat waiting, a duplicate, except this one was thicker, pages bulging. I slid it out, opened it. The first half was the same intake forms I'd already seen. The second half wasn't. Black and white photographs on glossy paper. Me at the gas station 2 weeks ago filling up. Me in my apartment kitchen, holding a mug. Me walking into my office building, jacket over one arm. Each dated, stamped, clipped into place. Surveillance, but not the kind you can explain with cameras. Each photo carried an annotation in neat handwriting. Heart rate elevated. Response, avoidant. Continued observation. The last photo was me asleep on the couch downstairs. blanket over my shoulders. Date, tonight, time, 1:14. I shoved it back into the shelf and stumbled out into the hall. The air seemed thicker, as if I'd stepped into a corridor filled with someone else's breath. My pulse clattered in my ears. At the far end, the man in the coat appeared again. Same stride, same unhurried pace. I pressed myself to the wall, but he didn't turn his head, didn't break rhythm. When he passed, I saw his badge swinging on a lanyard. Dr. Hart. No first name, just that. I turned the other way, half running now, past doors that all seemed closer together than they had a moment ago. Exit signs glowed above some, pointing contradictory ways. My hand brushed one door handle by accident, and it swung open. Inside, a row of beds, occupied. Patients lay beneath thin blankets, faces slack in sleep, each with a wristband, each with a monitor beside the bed that beeped, steady and synchronized. Too synchronized. No machine I'd ever heard could keep exact time like that. Their pulses were one pulse, their breaths one breath. I backed out, let the door close. My tea rose in my throat, bitter now. The folder in my bag seemed to weigh more with every step. A voice whispered from a vent overhead, soft, conversational, like someone paging through a chart and dictating notes. Couldn't make out the words, just the tone, curious, patient, possessive. I turned a corner and found Nurse Rao waiting, hands folded, braid neat, eyes steady. She looked at me like a teacher catching a student in the hallway after curfew. "You wandered," she said. Not a question. I was looking for. I stopped. I didn't know what I'd been looking for. Proof? A way out? Records, I said finally. She nodded, unsurprised. They find everyone eventually. Did you see yours? Yes. Her expression didn't change. Then you know you're being seen. That's half of care. The other half is consent. I didn't consent to any of this. You came inside, she said gently. That's the oldest consent there is. Her eyes flicked to the bag on my shoulder, where the folder bulged. It's easier if you don't carry them. They only get heavier. I want answers. You'll have them, she said, when you're ready to be admitted. Behind her, the clock over the nurse's station said 1:14. The second hand ticked forward one notch and stopped. Provitain, Nurse Rao didn't move, didn't blink. Her calm was the calm of a hallway at night, expectant, patient, filled with the authority of fluorescent light. The folder pressed against my ribs through the bag like a second heartbeat. I wanted to shove past her, but my feet had already learned the lesson of this place. Motion had to be negotiated, not taken. I'm not staying, I said. My voice sounded weak, like it had been filtered through gauze. You'll stay as long as the weather keeps you, Rao said. Long enough to let the building learn your rhythm. That's all it asks. And then it knows where to find you. She turned without waiting for me to answer, her braids swaying against her back, and walked down the corridor. I stood there a moment, trying to remember what road I'd been on, what town had been behind me, where I had been going before the storm. The images slipped like wet cards, nothing to grip. All I could see was the photograph in the folder, me asleep, time-stamped 1:14. I spun back toward the lobby. The signs promised exit in block letters, arrows pointing as if they meant it. I followed, quickening my pace, until I found myself before a set of glass doors. Beyond them, the curved drive. My car, waiting. The sleet had eased. The outside world was right there. I pressed the bar. The doors didn't open. I pressed harder, leaned my weight. Nothing. They shivered against the frame but refused to yield. The lights above them flickered once, as though amused. Behind me, a voice said, "They only open when someone leaves properly." I turned. The man from the waiting room, Carter, stood leaning on the vending machine, his wristband hanging loose now, the barcode smudged. His grin was tired, but his eyes were sharp. "What's properly?" I asked. You get discharged, he said. The chart gets signed. Otherwise, the doors think you're still inventory. I didn't check in. You drank their tea, Carter said. You let them write your name down. That's enough. You're on the board now. My hand's still on the bar, I said. So what happens if I break it? His grin widened. Then the building calls a code, and you won't like what comes running. As if on cue, a soft chime echoed through the hall. Carter raised an eyebrow. Hear that? That's for you. You've been wandering too long without supervision. Down the corridor, lights snapped on one by one, a wave of brightness rolling toward us. Shadows stretched ahead of it, long and thin, reaching. Carter pushed off the machine. Better get moving, he said. They don't like when visitors test the exits. He started down a side hall, limping slightly. Against my better judgment, I followed. The hall narrowed as we went, walls pressing closer, ceiling lower. The smell changed. Less bleach now, more dust, old plaster, something faintly sweet and rotten. Carter moved quickly, though he glanced back often, checking if I was still behind. You said they put you on observation, I said, my breath coming hard. They put everyone on something, he said. Observation's just the polite word for waiting, waiting to see if you give in. We turned a corner into a ward with rows of empty beds. Some still had sheets, stiff and yellowed. Others were bare, mattresses indented, as if someone had just risen. Monitors lined the walls, screens black, cords coiled like snakes. This wing hasn't been used in years, Carter said. Or maybe it has, and they just made it look like it hasn't. Hard to tell. We passed one bed where a clipboard still hung at the footrail, a name I didn't recognize. Vitals filled in with neat handwriting. Date blank. Diagnosis, weather-related. I slowed, reading, but Carter yanked me onward. Don't look too long. The paper likes to copy you if you stare. We reached a stairwell door. Carter pushed it open, and the smell hit me first. Metallic, damp, the smell of a basement that's been waiting too long. The stairs dropped into shadow. Down here, he said. Why? Because if you want to leave without being discharged, you have to find the old way out. The stairwell light buzzed overhead. I looked back once. The corridor we'd come from was empty, but the air shimmered as if it had been filled with heat. I followed him down. The basement was a different building, concrete walls streaked with mineral stains, pipes running low overhead, dripping occasionally into rusted buckets. The floor uneven, cracked. The air was thick, damp enough to coat the tongue. This is older than the hospital, Carter said, voice low. They built on top of it. Whatever this was before, it never stopped being itself. What was it? Storage, morgue, shelter, take your pick. Down here, the walls don't care what name they wear. We moved through narrow corridors, turning corners that seemed to forget geometry. My sense of direction collapsed in on itself. At one junction, we passed a door chained shut. Someone had painted across it in red. Not yet. I wanted to ask. I didn't. At last, Carter stopped before a steel door with a wheel handle like a submarine hatch. Rust licked the edges. This used to go out to the service road, he said. If it still does, you're free. If, he shrugged. Sometimes it opens, sometimes it doesn't. Depends if the hospital thinks you're ready. I stepped forward, gripped the wheel. It was cold, biting. I twisted. It resisted, then groaned, turning reluctantly, metal crying in protest. The door shuddered. For a heartbeat, I thought it would open. Then the lights above us flickered, and the wheel spun itself back, slamming into place with a clang. Carter laughed softly, without humor. Not tonight. You've still got pages left. The sound of footsteps echoed down the stairwell. Many footsteps, too many for 2 or 3 people. Slow, synchronized, deliberate. Carter's grin returned, sharp and tired. That'll be the code team. They're coming to tuck you back in. The steps grew louder, closer, the sound of shoes on concrete. I looked at Carter. What do? We hide, he said, and hope the building doesn't tell them where. We ducked into a side passage that looked more like a crack in the foundation than a hallway. Carter moved fast despite his limp, his head low, shoulders brushing the damp concrete. The footsteps filled the stairwell behind us, steady and countless, each one landing at the same interval, as if the bodies making them were less important than the rhythm itself. The smell of antiseptic grew sharper, mixing with something metallic and sour. We pressed deeper into the narrow passage until it bent sharply, opening into a storage space lined with old gurneys and wheelchairs stacked like skeletons waiting for purpose. Carter pressed a finger to his lips and motioned me behind a rusted supply cart. We crouched, the dark swallowing us. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairwell. They paused, then split, half moved to the left, half to the right. The sound of synchronized breathing joined the rhythm, mechanical and wet, like ventilators without patience. The air itself seemed to thicken, as though the basement were inhaling with them. A sliver of light appeared under the door to the storage room, faint at first, then brightening as shadows passed by. I held my breath. Carter's hand gripped my arm hard enough to bruise, warning me without words. The handle of the storage room door rattled once. The door didn't open. Whoever was outside simply stood there waiting, long enough for my heartbeat to lose track of its own rhythm. Then the footsteps moved on, continuing their synchronized march deeper into the basement. We stayed still long after the sound faded, the silence after louder than the noise had been. Carter finally let go of my arm. "Code team," he whispered. "They round up strays. If you'd stayed by the exit, they'd have collected you." "Collected me for what?" I whispered back. "To put you where you belong. A bed, a chart, an IV drip if you resist. And you, observation, like I said. They don't mind if I walk around, as long as I stay in sight when it matters. So why help me?" He gave a short laugh that had no humor. "Because new blood reminds me I'm still alive, and because watching them break someone is worse than risking it myself." He stood carefully, his outline barely visible in the dim light. "We can't stay here. They'll sweep back." I followed him out into another corridor, this one lower, pipes dripping overhead, puddles reflecting the faint glow of bulbs that hummed like tired insects. The walls were painted once, decades ago, but the color had peeled to gray. My bag felt heavier with every step, the folder inside pulling at my shoulder as if trying to root me here. We reached a junction where one hall sloped upward. A faint draft moved down from it, cool and fresh, carrying the smell of wet leaves and open air. "That's the old ambulance ramp," Carter said. "If it hasn't been bricked up, it's the best chance you'll get." I hurried toward it, but Carter caught my sleeve. "Not so fast. The hospital doesn't like people choosing the wrong way. If you run, it notices. If you notice back, sometimes it lets you through." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to slow down. The incline stretched ahead, walls narrowing as if reluctant to part. At the top I could just make out another set of double doors. No lock, no chains, just heavy steel painted hospital white. We climbed in silence. Each step felt like it was being measured, noted, written into some invisible ledger. Halfway up, a soft sound drifted from the walls, low and steady, like someone whispering directly into the concrete. It wasn't words, not at first, just tone, curious and coaxing. Then it shaped itself into a sentence. "Back to bed." My knees nearly buckled. Carter grabbed my arm and shook his head, eyes wide, silently pleading for me not to answer. We kept walking. The voice followed, slipping through the walls, now closer to my ear. "Back to bed. You'll feel better." I clenched my teeth and pressed on. The doors grew larger, closer. My pulse roared in my ears. When we reached them, Carter pushed first, leaning his weight. The doors resisted, then gave a reluctant groan. Cold night air hit my face, sharp and wet. Relief surged in my chest. But before we could step through, alarms shrieked behind us. Not mechanical alarms, voices. A chorus, layered, dozens of voices crying the same phrase in unison. Code, code, code. The sound rolled down the hall like a storm, filling the air until my bones vibrated. Carter's eyes widened. They know, he shouted over the noise. Decide now, in or out. I shoved at the door with everything I had. It opened wider, enough to reveal the ramp sloping up into the night, lit by the faint orange of street lamps. I stepped forward, but Carter hesitated. Aren't you coming? I shouted. He shook his head. I can't. Not yet. My discharge isn't written. Behind him, the chorus drew closer, the sound swelling, a tidal wave of command. Carter gave me one last sharp grin, equal parts warning and farewell. Run, and don't look back. I stumbled onto the ramp, the cold rain stinging my face, and bolted upward into the dark. The rain hit harder as I pushed up the ramp, stinging needles on my face, soaking through my jacket in seconds. I didn't care. Each step took me further from the voices, from the endless chorus behind the doors that now shuddered and slammed as though the whole hospital was trying to wrench itself open. The ramp bent once, then again, and ended in an open lot lit by two failing flood lamps. Beyond it, the hill sloped into darkness where a service road should have been. My car wasn't here. Nothing was here but puddles that reflected the sickly orange light. I ran across the cracked pavement, shoes splashing, heart hammering in my throat. At the far edge of the lot, a chain-link fence stretched left and right, higher than it had any right to be, its top crowned with barbed wire. No gate, no break, just fence as far as I could see in the rain. I grabbed the cold metal and shook it. Solid. The rain hissed on the wire like it was alive. Behind me, the chorus grew quieter, muffled by the storm, but I could still feel it vibrating in my ribs. Code, code, code. I followed the fence line, slipping in the mud, until I found a corner where a tree leaned too close. Its branches bent over the wire, wet and heavy, and the trunk angled just enough to climb. I scrambled up, fingers slick on the bark, shoes slipping, until I swung a leg over the top. The barbed wire tore at my jeans, caught my skin, but I shoved forward, dropped on the other side, and hit the ground hard. The impact knocked the breath out of me. I rolled onto my back, gasping, rain pouring into my mouth. The world on this side of the fence was woods, dense, wet, endless. No road, no lights, just trees pressing close together like they'd been waiting for me. I forced myself up, clutching my bag to my chest. The folder inside felt heavier than ever, dragging at my shoulder. I unzipped it, meaning to throw the damn thing away, but when I pulled it out, the folder was dry, not a drop of rain on it. The paper inside glowed faintly, as if lit from beneath. My own photograph stared back at me climbing the tree, me tearing free of the barbed wire, time-stamped with the same mocking precision, 1:14. The rain around me hushed for a moment, the way sound sometimes drops before thunder. Then the whisper came again, soft, sliding through the trees. Back to bed. I froze. The whisper wasn't behind me anymore. It was ahead, in the woods, waiting. I staggered forward, branches slapping at my face, mud sucking at my shoes. I ran without direction, only the desperate hope that somewhere out here was a road, a light, anything not made of concrete or paper. My breath tore itself out of me in ragged bursts. My legs burned. The whisper followed, not closer, not farther, always exactly near enough to hear. Back to bed. You'll feel better. At last the trees thinned, and I stumbled into a clearing. Gravel crunched under my feet. A road. Empty, wet, shining with rain. Relief punched through me so sharp, I almost sobbed. I staggered down the center line, searching for headlights, for the sound of an engine. Nothing. Just me and the storm. Then, far ahead, a shape emerged through the rain. A building. Low, long, familiar, letters glowing weakly over its entrance. St. I stopped dead. My throat closed. My chest screamed for air. It was impossible. I had run, climbed, bled, broken free, and yet here it was again, waiting, its automatic doors opening with a sigh that I felt in my bones. The folder slipped from my hand. The rain didn't touch it. The papers inside fluttered once, as if in greeting, then settled. A new line of text had been added beneath my photograph, patient returning. The whisper came no longer from the woods, but from inside me, soft and certain, spoken in my own voice. Back to bed. I took one step toward the entrance, then another. The glass doors opened before I touched them, breathing out the same warm citrus bleach air that had greeted me the first time. It wrapped around me like a blanket I didn't want but couldn't shrug off. My soaked clothes steamed faintly in the sudden heat, and for a moment the relief of being out of the rain almost drowned out the terror of where I was. Almost. The lobby looked unchanged. The couch, the outdated travel magazines, the clock fixed forever at 1:14. R. Delaney sat at the desk, posture identical, smile patient. She didn't look surprised to see me, not even faintly. "Welcome back," she said, as if I'd only stepped outside for air. "I left," I whispered. "You tried," she corrected gently. "The building doesn't hold grudges. It knows what's best." I shook my head, water dripping into my eyes. "You can't keep me here." "We don't keep anyone," Delaney said. "We care for them until they understand." The folder was back in my hands. I hadn't picked it up, hadn't carried it inside, but there it was, neat and dry, the weight of it undeniable. I opened it without meaning to. The latest page held a fresh photo. Me at the fence line, bleeding from the barbed wire, time-stamped 1:14. Below it, a single sentence in neat script. "Patient returned voluntarily." "No," I said. My voice shook. "That's not what happened." Delaney tilted her head, sympathy too smooth to be real. "Records don't lie. They make sense of what you cannot." I slammed the folder shut. The sound echoed too loudly in the warm air. "I'm leaving," I said. "Now." From behind me came the soft squeak of shoes on linoleum. I turned. The code team filled the hallway, moving in unison, faces indistinct under the fluorescent glare. Their steps landed together, not marching, not hurrying, just inevitable. Carter stood with them. His grin was gone. His eyes looked hollow. A wristband gleamed white on his arm, a name written now, where before there had been none. My name. The code team spread out, forming a wall of bodies. No urgency, no aggression, just presence, the weight of inevitability. The folder slipped open in my hand again. A pen rested inside, clipped to a blank line at the bottom of the page. Patient signature. The ink was fresh, wet, waiting. Delaney's voice was quiet, but filled the whole lobby. "Sign, and you'll rest, you'll stop running. The weather will pass. The building will keep you safe." The pen was heavy in my hand, heavier than it should have been. My arm trembled, the page blurred, the black letters swimming. Behind me, the code team breathed as one, a sound like ventilators sinking to a single patient. For one terrible moment, I wanted it, the promise of surrender, the end of running, of cold, of fear, just back to bed. But then I saw Carter's grin, the way it had been before the building wrote him down. I saw the empty eyes of the patients in Ward C, their pulses beating in one rhythm. I saw my own face in the photographs, stamped and filed, and I knew what signing meant. Not rest, not safety. Just becoming another record, neat and complete. I dropped the pen. It clattered on the floor, louder than thunder. The code team stepped forward. The lights flickered. The building seemed to shiver in its foundation. I ran. Not for the doors this time. They wouldn't open. Not for the stairwell. I knew where that led. I ran for the hall beyond the vending machines, where the ceiling tiles sagged and the smell of damp plaster drowned the bleach. I heard Delaney's voice behind me, calm as ever, back to bed. The chorus of the code team followed, echoing the words, not shouted, but pressed into the air, sealing the walls around me. I didn't stop. My lungs burned. My shoes slapped water from the floor. The building bent and twisted, hallways looping back, signs pointing in lies. But I kept moving, left when it said right, down when it said up, blind, desperate, refusing to give the building what it wanted. And then, light, not fluorescent, pale, gray, soft, morning. A doorway yawned ahead, half collapsed, plaster spilling around it. Beyond was open sky, trees dripping with last night's rain, the distant hiss of tires on wet asphalt. I threw myself through the gap. Cold air filled my lungs. The ground outside was mud and gravel, uneven but real. I looked back once. The hospital loomed in silence, its windows black, its sign dead. No Delaney, no Rouse, no Carter, just an empty building, abandoned, sagging against the weight of the hill. The folder was gone from my hands. My arms felt light, too light. I staggered down the slope, found the road, and followed it. After a mile, a gas station appeared, ordinary and bright, its neon open sign buzzing. A clerk looked up as I entered, bored, human, real. But even as I stood at the counter, dripping rain, asking where the nearest town was, I felt it. The faint hum in the air, the sense of being watched, measured, noted. And when I checked my phone, the time still read 1:14. Now, on to the next story. The night train wasn't on the schedule. It slid into the station without a number on its nose, just a blank plate that reflected the platform lights in a way that made my eyes water. The announcement board didn't change. No chime, no line of text, just the stubborn insistence that nothing unusual was happening. But the train opened its doors and breathed out a ribbon of warm air that smelled faintly of coal and something sweet, like oranges left too long on a windowsill. I had been waiting 3 hours for a delayed service that was now an hour past any faith I had left. The station cafe had closed. The heat had lowered to whatever setting keeps pipes from sulking, and the handful of other travelers had spread themselves into islands of coats and bags, their faces lit by the blue geography of their phones. When the doors parted without announcement, the people around me looked up in a small wave, then away, as if we'd all agreed in advance to pretend that the night sometimes offered us reasonable options. The car closest to me had old wood paneling you don't see anymore, the warm varnished color of a piano that's been played daily for a century. No graffiti, no scuffs, no dings from the thousands of bags that should have bruised it by now. The windows were clean enough that my reflection looked like a person making a decision. Inside, lamps glowed a yellow that remembered gaslight. It made everyone's faces kind for a moment before memory caught up. A conductor stood in the doorway of the car, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. He wore a uniform that had jumped decades, dark jacket that fit like it had been made for him specifically, cap with a polished brim, a watch fob disappearing into a pocket. His face had the agelessness of people who spend their lives in transit, not young, not old, washed by motion into something stubbornly unplaceable. Evening, he said. Northbound? Anywhere bound, I said, only half joking. He smiled as if I'd answered correctly on a test I hadn't known I was taking. We'll take you where you meant to go. I'm not sure I know where that is. The train does, he said. He lifted a hand, palm out, a gesture halfway between blessing and traffic control. All aboard. The phrase would have sounded tacky from anyone else. From him, it felt like a rope thrown across a gap. I stepped up. The doorway took my weight with the soft give of a vessel that understands people are heavier at this hour. The car smelled like polish and cloth and the ghost of cigarettes long extinguished. The The seats were upholstered in a deep green that made shadows look comfortable. No assigned numbers, no little LED screens arguing with themselves about reservations. Just benches and pairs, a few tables with chessboards inlaid beneath the glass. There were more people than I expected, not full, but not empty. A woman in a traveling hat who might have been going home from a funeral if anyone wore hats to funerals anymore. A man with a briefcase so old it had stopped pretending to be leather. A pair of teenagers in hoodies playing cards silently, their eyes flicking up at me and away again with the reflexes of strays who have learned politeness as a survival tactic. I took a seat by a window, facing forward because I don't like pretending the world moves backward. The conductor moved down the aisle with the perpetual motion of someone who can balance on a curve you can't see. He didn't check tickets. He didn't ask questions. He nodded when people met his eye and did not insist when they didn't. The doors closed with a seal that made my ears pop, and the train shuddered the way animals do when they make a decision together. We moved. The station slid away as if it were relieved to see us go. The platform lights receded into a polite line that might have been a constellation if the sky had been in the mood. Tunnels took us. Brick blurred. The sound of wheels on tracks settled into the heartbeat of travel. A two-part rhythm that says we're not there yet, but we're not nowhere either. My phone had a bar of service, and then none, and then an invented wishful dot that meant nothing. The clock at the top of the screen stuck at 12:03. I turned it off because I didn't feel like being lied to in such a small font. The window showed me myself, and beyond that, the dark. Once the reflection of the conductor's cap slid past my shoulder, like a second thought. When he reached me, he paused, not looming, not deferential, just present in the way good servers and wolves are present when they want you to know you have options, and also don't. Long night, he said. It was longer before I got on. That's the point of trains, he said, as if telling a child that tables keep plates above floors. We collect the length and give it back to you as distance. Do you need a ticket? I asked, to anchor us in something transactional. You'll have it when we arrive, he said. We'll settle then. Settle what? What you owe, and what you're owed. He moved on before I could decide whether to be charmed or worried. The woman in the hat asked him for hot water. He brought her tea that smelled like chamomile and something else I couldn't place, a bitter note that made the back of my throat itch in a way that had nothing to do with allergies. The teenagers kept their game going without acknowledging that the cards were older than their grandparents. The man with the briefcase opened it and closed it again without taking anything out, like a person checking on a sleeping animal. The car rocked. The lamps hummed. Beyond the glass, the night showed me the shape of trees. Not clearly, not like a movie, just the suggestion of vertical intentions. We passed through a small station without slowing. A single figure stood on the platform, hands in pockets, head turned toward the train as if counting cars. He didn't raise a hand, neither did we. A woman slid into the seat across from me without asking. She wore a dark coat and a scarf that looked like it had been knit by someone who believed a neck should never feel alone. Her hair was loose and not trying to impress anyone. She had the kind of face people tell secrets to in grocery store lines. Do you know where this goes? She asked. North, I said. Anywhere bound. She smiled in a way that made me want to apologize for stealing her line, even though I hadn't. That's what he told me, too. We sat a minute without adding anything, and it felt like usefulness. Then she said, I got on at a station that hasn't existed for 20 years. How do you know? There's a bank there now. I've deposited checks. Banks come and go. So do stations, she said, but I knew the crack in the third tile from the left. I used to step over it so I wouldn't make wishes carelessly. I nodded, because some statements only want to be acknowledged by the part of you that understands children, make rules that keep oceans from climbing stairs. How long have you been on? I asked. Since I sat down, she said, and it could have been a joke but wasn't. I'm Mara. I gave her my name, and it made a clean sound in the air between us, as if it had been waiting to be spoken to someone who could carry part of its weight for a while. The conductor reappeared with a brass tray, a detail so out of time it wrapped back around and became practical. He set a cup in front of me without asking what I wanted. The liquid inside was a dark amber, not quite tea, not quite anything I could name. House blend, he said. It keeps the track polite. Does the track need politeness? Everything does, he said, and moved on. I wrapped my hands around the cup. Heat traveled into the bones of my fingers, the way certain notes travel into your chest in an empty church. I tasted it because not tasting would have made the whole evening a farce. It was bitter and sweet and something like smoke, but not the smoke of fire, more the idea of something that had burned a long time ago and decided to remember instead of apologize. It didn't taste good. It tasted necessary. The train entered a tunnel so long the car seemed to focus. The lamps brightened a fraction. The faces around me sharpened and then softened again, like someone practicing their signature. In the reflected glass, I saw the car behind us, even though physics should have prevented that. It was not the same as this one. Its lamps were dimmer, its upholstery faded, its passengers older by some unit of measurement that had nothing to do with years. When the tunnel ended, the reflection ended. I told myself it had been a trick of angles. Don't look back too long, Mara said, as if I'd spoken aloud. You'll see yourself, and you won't like which car you're in. Have you been on this train before? We all have, she said, in the way you stand in the doorway of a room you've already left because the light was nice, and you think you can borrow it for whatever comes next. The teenagers slapped down cards at the same moment and hissed with satisfaction, 2 cats discovering a secret drawer. A man 3 rows up, whom I hadn't noticed until he made a sound like relief, disguised as a cough, dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief, and looked surprised to find it wet. The conductor slid the door to the next car open, and a breeze moved through that did not belong to this air. It smelled like winter coats hung to dry in a hallway that understands damp. He paused in the threshold, listening to something only he could hear. The door closed behind him, and with a faint click, locked. They add cars, Mara said. When? When someone thinks of getting off. I swallowed. Do they subtract them? When someone stops trying. I watched the window for a landmark I could name. A road crossing, a billboard, the ugly orange of a warehouse district. The train showed me trees and the idea of a river. Once a farmhouse on a hill with one light in one window, a kindness so small it felt like pity. The conductor returned from behind with a roll of tickets in his hand. He stopped at each passenger, tore one off, and set it on the little silver rail at the edge of the table. When he reached us, he studied my face as if looking for a crack I didn't know I had. Yours will be ready at dawn, he said, and gave Mara hers. The ticket was the color of old receipts. Her name was printed on it, in a font that belonged to a time when papers mattered enough to be stored in boxes with twine. Under her name, in small letters, valid until the next decision. How long is that? I asked. Depends on whether you decide, she said, tucking the ticket into the pocket of her coat, as if it might burn a hole if it stayed in the open too long. I lifted my cup and found it full again. I hadn't seen anyone refill it. The bittersweet smoke sank into me a degree deeper, to that place where rest lives when it's pretending to be possible. The train slowed. It didn't brake the way normal trains do. No long whine of metal, no gentle insistence. It simply eased itself into stillness, as if it had reached something it wanted, rather than something it had been told to stop for. The platform that met us was narrow and made of wood, and it looked like it had been hammered together by someone who believed you should only ever build things by hand. No sign, no name. The conductor opened the door and stood aside. No one moved. The teenagers paused their game and looked at each other as if to say, "Not yet." The man with the briefcase laced his fingers together and stared at his knuckles. Mara watched the doorway with the hope you give a coin you're about to throw into a fountain. A figure stood on the platform, an older woman with a canvas bag over one shoulder and a dog on a leash. The dog looked at the train with tired respect. The woman did not look at it at all. She kept her eyes on the horizon beyond us, which the night had refused to provide. "Will she get on?" I whispered. "She'll decide," Mara said, "or the train will decide it for her. Is that how it works?" "It's how everything works," she said, so gently I forgave her for being right. The woman stepped forward. The dog did not. It planted its feet and stared at the gap. The leash went taut. The woman said the dog's name, just a sound, and the dog made a noise in return. I couldn't hear but felt in my teeth. The conductor did not interfere. He waited with the patience of someone who knows that time is a material you can bend if you warm it slowly. The woman folded. Not her body, her decision. She stepped back. The dog sat, satisfied, as if to say, "Good, you remembered." The conductor tipped his cap to both of them, the woman for choosing, the dog for teaching. He closed the door, and we moved again. Mara let out a breath that had been considering becoming a sob. She didn't let it. "Do you have anyone waiting at the other end?" she asked. "I thought I did," I said. "Tonight it feels like I may have invented them to give the road a shape." "The train will decide if that's true," she said. "And if it is, then it will give you a different end," she said. "Trains are kind when you don't make them be trains." "What else would they be?" "Conversations," she said, and I knew the word was right. The conductor appeared with a small book, bound in cracked leather. He set it on the table between us. It had no title on its spine. He opened to the middle and turned the book so I could see. The page showed a map, not of tracks, not of stations, of rooms, a hallway, a kitchen, a bedroom with a window that faced west, a small square that might have been a closet you could sit in when the world was too loud. The rooms were labeled with words that weren't words. The smell of coffee at 4 in the morning, the sound of someone you love turning in their sleep, and the relief of the continued breathing after. The light that happens on Tuesday evenings in late October at latitude you can taste but not name. "We collect routes," the conductor said, "not rails. People mistake the two. What happens if you get off at the wrong place?" "You get on," he said. Again, he closed the book. It made the kind of sound some people call a thud and others call a promise. He nodded to Mara. "You're close." "I never am," she said with weary affection. "Tonight you are," he said. He moved on. The teenagers' card game ended in a draw they both seemed proud of. The man with the handkerchief had put his head back and was letting his mouth learn to sleep with dignity. I finished my cup and found it empty for once, as if the train had decided I had enough inside me to last the next stretch. Mara leaned her head against the window. Her eyes closed. Her scarf slid, exposing the delicate place where pulse is polite enough to make itself available. In the glass I saw not my reflection, but a dark field, and very far away a line of red lights that could have been a city, or a convoy, or a mistake. The car door at the front slid open. A girl stepped in, 12, 13, hair in 2 braids that had survived longer than the style deserved. She wore a coat that didn't fit and boots that did. She walked down the aisle with the assurance of someone who had been told trains were safe. When she reached my row, she stopped and put both hands on the table as if anchoring the whole car. "You dropped this," she said, and set down a ticket. It had my name on it in that same patient font, and beneath, valid until the line after the word was blank. I looked up at her. Where did you find it? You left it in the other car, she said. Which other car? The one you were sitting in, she said, as if that solved anything. Thank you, I said, because the rules of objects handed to you by children on trains are the oldest rules we have. She nodded, grave, and looked past me toward Mara. You're next. I know, Mara said without opening her eyes. Don't let him forget, the girl said, and was gone, moving down the aisle and out the door with the quickness of news that has decided to be kind. I picked up the ticket. It was warm. The blank after valid until looked less like an omission and more like an invitation. I slid it into my pocket and felt the paper settle against my leg, heavier than it should have been, a weight like a key. The train rounded a curve. The landscape offered a low valley filled with fog, the kind that makes streetlights look like lanterns carried by very careful ghosts. We passed another platform with no name. No one stood there. The conductor did not slow. Mara's breathing evened out. The teenagers began a new game that required tapping rather than slapping. The man with the briefcase opened it again, and this time took out a photograph and looked at it as if the person inside might climb out if he was patient. When the conductor reached our row again, he placed a small brass bell on the table. It was the kind you see on hotel desks in movies, the kind no one actually uses because people don't want to be the kind of person who rings for attention. When you're ready, he said. For what? For the stop that isn't on the map, he said. You won't get it otherwise. What's it called? He considered and then, with the humility of an honest man, said, You'll tell me. He left us with the bell. I stared at it like a test I hadn't studied for. Mara opened her eyes. Don't ring it unless you plan to stand up, she said. You only get so many faints before the train decides your furniture. How many? Depends, she said, and closed her eyes again in a way that meant the conversation was not over, but also didn't need to continue immediately. The bell sat there, round and simple, dustless. The urge to press it rose and fell with the motion of the car. I took my hand off the table and put it in my lap because I am not to be trusted with easy buttons. The lamps dimmed a fraction and then brightened, a pulse I felt in my own chest before I saw it. Somewhere a door opened and did not close. Air changed. The smell of oranges, faint but insistent, threaded through the car. My mother used to put orange peels on the radiator in winter to trick the house into remembering summer. The conductor stopped at the far end of the aisle and turned as if listening to an announcement none of us could hear. Next, he said softly. The train chose to slow. Mara sat up, wrapped her scarf, and smoothed the front of her coat like armor. If I leave, she said, the rest of the night is yours. How will I know where to get off? She smiled, and for the first time, I saw the tired in it, not the human kind, but the kind you get from arguing with yourself for years. You'll know where you've been avoiding. She stood. The car seemed to incline toward her in a way that had nothing to do with gravity. The door opened onto a platform that looked like the back steps of a school no one uses, but everyone remembers. A street lamp flickered, then held steady out of embarrassment. A wind moved through, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't yet decided to fall. Mara looked at me, then at the bell, then back at me. Don't let them ring it for you, she said. It's rude. Good luck, I said, and meant it in the oldest sense. She nodded and stepped out. The conductor tipped his cap. The door closed. We moved. My ticket warmed again in my pocket, like a small animal waking. I put my hand over it, as if I could keep it from deciding without me. The conductor walked back, paused at my row, and rested his hand lightly on the brass bell's dome. Whenever you're ready, he said. And if I'm not, then you'll be, he said. Sooner than you think, later than is comfortable. He moved on, and the night through the window shifted its weight. I felt as clearly as I have ever felt anything, the knowledge that the train had added a car somewhere behind us. I did not turn to look. I stared at the bell until its reflection doubled in my eyes and made a third, phantom bell at the edge of my vision that seemed truer than the one in front of me. I took my hand off my lap and set my fingertips on the table, not touching the bell, just close enough to feel its chill. The teenagers fell silent mid-tap. The man with the briefcase folded his photo and put it away as if obeying a rule. The lamps brightened and then held. The track sang the old two-part song. The blank after valid until waited. A small patient door. I lifted my hand. I didn't ring the bell. Not yet. The train carried me forward as if it already knew my hesitation. The bell stayed between my hands, patient, shining faintly in the lamplight. Every time the car rocked, the little clapper inside shifted with a dull click, the promise of sound waiting to be chosen. I stared out the window, and the dark stared back, but here and there something interrupted it, brief, uncanny flashes. A house lit up for a moment, square and bright, then gone before I could count the windows. A crossroads under a blinking yellow signal, the asphalt slick as if it had just rained, but the train wheels stayed dry. A figure at one stoplight, umbrella open, standing utterly still. The car moved on before my eyes could tell me whether the figure had a face. The conductor passed by without speaking. His presence pressed the air flat around me. I wanted him to ask for the bell back, to take the decision out of my hands, but he only glanced at me once, the way a doctor checks a chart, and kept moving. The man with the briefcase shifted, set the case on his lap, then back on the floor again, indecision weighing more than the leather. The teenagers had stopped their game entirely. One of them leaned back, arms crossed, eyes closed, as though refusing to see what might be offered next. The other stared at me like I might be contagious. I pulled the ticket from my pocket. It had soaked up heat from my skin. My name was still there in that font that pretended to be official. Beneath it, the word valid until, the blank line untouched. But now there was a faint smudge, not quite ink, not quite ash, bleeding into the margin like something had pressed too hard while writing. "Are you afraid?" a voice asked. It wasn't the conductor. It wasn't anyone I could see. It was close to my ear, too close. I turned sharply, but the seat beside me was empty. Mara's absence looked heavier than any presence would have. The lamps flickered. When they steadied, the car had changed. Not all of it, just pieces. The upholstery was thinner, faded, patches showing where fabric had worn through. The brass rails were tarnished in streaks that hadn't been there a heartbeat ago. Even the air smelled different, less polish, more damp wool, like coats forgotten in closets. I looked down the aisle. The conductor was gone. The door to the next car was shut. No sound of his steps, no creak of hinges. The passengers sat still, as wax, their faces blurred by shadow, but I knew if I called out they'd all turn at once. The bell quivered under my fingertips, not a trick of the train's motion, but as if something beneath the metal was restless, eager to be released. I lifted my hand, and the vibration stopped. I pressed my palm flat on the dome, and it resumed, faster, like a heartbeat climbing. I told myself not to, but my hand lifted anyway. The bell rang. The sound was small, no louder than a spoon tapping glass, yet it filled the car, blooming outward until the air itself seemed to carry it. The reflections in the window doubled, trebled, stretched into corridors of light that had no end. The train slowed. The platform that rose to meet us this time was different. It wasn't wood, wasn't brick. It was earth, packed dirt and grass worn flat. A single lamppost bent at the middle, as if bowing. Beyond it stretched a field under a sky that was not night, not dawn, but something in between, the color of bruises healing. The door opened. Cold wind blew through, carrying the smell of rain-soaked earth and a note of something chemical, sharp, stinging the back of my throat. "Your stop," a voice said. The conductor stood at the open doorway. His face was older now. The brim of his cap hid his eyes. His posture was bent in ways I hadn't seen before, as if the weight of too many decisions had finally chosen him back. "I don't know this place," I said. "You do," he replied. "You just won't name it." The dirt platform stretched empty and endless. I couldn't see where it began or ended, only that it was mine. The bell on the table was gone. In its place lay another ticket. My name again, but beneath it, a single word had been written on the blank line, a word I hadn't spoken aloud in years. It was the name of a town I had left behind long ago, a place I swore I'd never see again. The conductor tipped his head toward the open door. "Time to get off." I tightened my grip on the ticket until the paper cut my fingers. The ink smudged. The field beyond the lamppost waited, wide and patient, as though it already knew which choice I'd make. The step down from the car was higher than it should have been, like the train wanted me to hesitate. My shoes sank into the dirt platform, the earth damp and uneven beneath me. Cold climbed through the soles into my bones. The train exhaled behind me, a long, tired sigh, and for a moment I thought it might pull away, but it stayed. The open doorway framed the conductor like a painting hung crooked. His cap shadowed his eyes, but I felt him watching. The lamppost hummed faintly, its bulb trembling. Beyond it, the field stretched flat, empty except for patches of grass that bent the wrong way against the wind. The horizon was close but unreachable, the sky bruised purple-gray, heavy with something that was not weather. I walked forward. The dirt gave way to grass, slick with dew that didn't shine. My shoes darkened with it. Each step was louder than it should have been, as if the field was listening. The ticket in my hand warmed until I had to let it go. It fluttered down, face up, and the earth swallowed it like it had been waiting. The grass bent toward the spot, bowing, then straightened again. I turned back once. The train looked different from here, older, hunched, its lamps dim like eyes fading. The faces in the windows were blurred by distance, but I could feel their stares, not malicious, not kind, just a weight, as if they were measuring whether I belonged more with them or here. The conductor raised one hand in a gesture that was neither farewell nor welcome. The door slid shut. The train did not move. It simply existed, silent, a line of cars pressed into the field like fossils. A sound moved across the grass. At first I thought it was the wind, but it came too steady, too patterned. Footsteps, many of them approaching from no direction I could name. The grass bent and rose, parting, and figures began to emerge. They looked like townspeople, or the idea of them. A man in overalls stained with earth, a woman in a floral dress faded to gray, children with school books under their arms. Their faces were wrong, blurred at the edges like half-developed photographs, but I knew them, the tilt of a head, the curve of a smile, the details my memory had sworn I'd buried. It was the town I had left, the one I swore I'd never return to. The figures stopped a few feet away, lined up in neat rows. None of them spoke, their silence pressed against me, thick, demanding. I whispered, "This isn't real." The man in overalls tilted his head. His voice was low, but it carried clear across the field. It was real enough to leave. My chest tightened. The words felt like they came from inside my ribs instead of his mouth. The woman in the faded dress spoke next. "You left us, but we kept the space for you. We always kept it." Her smile widened, and for a moment her face sharpened into someone I used to know. A neighbor, a teacher, a friend, but then blurred again. The children stepped forward in unison. Their books opened, pages blank. They lifted them high, showing me absence made official. The lamppost flickered once, then steadied. The hum grew louder, impatient. Behind me, the train finally moved. Not away, but sideways, sliding into the horizon like it was being erased. The field widened in its absence. I stood alone with the blurred townspeople, the sky pressing down, the grass whispering against itself. The air tasted like old choices. The man in overalls spoke again. "You can come back now. You can fill the space we saved." His voice was calm, but the calm of soil covering something. The woman in the dress added, "Or you can refuse again and wander until another train finds you. But the field won't let you leave without deciding." The children held their blank pages higher, a forest of empty. I felt the cut on my fingers sting, blood beating bright and red. It fell to the grass. The blades bent, greedy, and drank it in. The whole field leaned closer. The field leaned toward me, every blade of grass a finger pointing back to the place I'd left, every blurred face waiting for my surrender. My blood was already in the soil, a signature I hadn't meant to give, but I clenched my fist and let the sting of the cut remind me I was still mine. "I'm not coming back," I said. My voice shook but carried. "You can keep the space empty. It's not mine anymore." The man in overalls frowned, though his face rippled at the edges, as if it couldn't hold shape against refusal. "You think leaving twice makes you free?" His voice thickened, doubling, tripling, as though others inside him spoke the same line. "It just makes you smaller." The woman in the faded dress stepped closer. Her smile snapped too wide, the blur of her face stretching until it resembled a dozen people layered on top of each other. "We saved everything for you. The chair at the table, the name on the list. You can't walk away from that." "I already did," I said, louder now. "I won't fill your empty pages. I won't live in the story you've written for me." The children hissed, their blank books trembling. The paper fluttered without wind, and letters began to burn themselves onto the pages. My name, over and over, scrawled in dozens of hands, each one uglier than the last. The lamppost above me flickered violently. The bulb popped, showering sparks that sizzled out before they touched the earth. Darkness swallowed the field, except for the faint glow of the blurred faces. They surged forward, not running, not lunging, just advancing like a tide. My legs locked, the grass tightened around my ankles, curling, pulling, tasting for purchase. I tore free, stumbling back toward the spot where the train had stood. There was nothing there now, only dirt and horizon, but I ran anyway. The field stretched longer, endless, every step dragging like wading through syrup. The voices followed, back, 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 each word cracked against the air, trying to hammer me into shape. "No," I shouted, throat raw. "You can't have me." The earth under my feet buckled. A fissure ripped across the field, wide and sudden, a wound opening beneath the blurred townspeople. They stopped at the edge, faces flickering, books snapping shut. Their silence was louder than their voices had been. The crack glowed faintly, not with fire, but with movement, shadows twisting, shapes slipping deeper than any ground should allow. I realized the field wasn't opening to swallow me. It was cutting me off from them, a rejection of my rejection. The blurred figures faded, dissolving into ash that drifted back into the soil. The sound of their voices thinned, stretched, and snapped. I was alone. The sky above lightened a fraction, the bruised yellow shifting to gray. The horizon sharpened, and there, impossibly, the train waited again. Not where I'd left it, not anywhere sensible, just there, solid, its lamps glowing, doors open as though I'd only stepped off for air. I stumbled toward it, chest heaving, blood sticky on my hand. The platform was back too, wood this time, the boards creaking like an old house that remembered your weight. The conductor stood in the doorway, hat pulled low. He said nothing until I reached the threshold, then inclined his head just enough to be both invitation and warning. "You fought it," he said. "Few do." "I'm not theirs," I whispered. "Not theirs," he agreed. "Not yet ours either." He stepped aside. I climbed back on. The doors closed with a soft sigh, and the train began to move. The passengers hadn't shifted. The teenagers played again. The man with the briefcase stared at nothing, but Mara's seat was still empty, her scarf folded neatly across the cushion as if she had known I'd need the reminder. I sat. My legs trembled. My chest ached. The ticket burned in my pocket, hot enough to sting. I pulled it out. The line beneath valid until was still filled, but the ink had warped, the letters twisting. It no longer spelled the town's name. Now it read only one word: next. The train rolled on, smooth as breath. The lamps hummed above, steady again, though their light felt thinner than before, stretched tight like skin over bone. I pressed the ticket flat on the table, staring at the word written across it: next. No station name, no time, no direction, just the promise or threat of continuation. The teenagers had gone silent. Their cards lay scattered, untouched, the red and black shapes forming no pattern at all. One of them glanced at me with open fear, as if I had carried something back from the field. The man with the briefcase hunched over his knees, clutching the case like a life vest. His knuckles were white, his breathing shallow. No one spoke. The air in the car felt thinner, too, stripped of its earlier polish. Now it smelled faintly of iron and smoke, like a rail yard left to rust. I looked at Mara's empty seat again. Her scarf sat perfectly folded, but something about it had changed. It wasn't the same color anymore. What had been a deep, comforting red now looked gray, almost ash. My throat tightened. The conductor returned, moving slowly down the aisle. He didn't carry a tray this time, or a roll of tickets. His hands were empty, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his cap. When he reached me, he placed one hand on the table and leaned in slightly. "You refused," he said. "I had to," I whispered, his head tilted. "Do you know what that means? That I'm free of them?" "No." His voice was almost kind. "It means the train owns the choice now." The ticket on the table trembled, the word NX rippling as if ink were still wet. "Where does that take me?" I asked. "Where it wants," he said simply, "where you've avoided longest." The floor beneath me vibrated harder, the wheels taking on a rhythm that felt urgent, impatient. The window beside me blackened until even my reflection disappeared. The hum of the lamps faltered, then steadied with a dimmer glow. Passengers shifted uneasily. The teenagers gathered their cards like shields. The man with the briefcase whispered something into his hands, prayer or apology, I couldn't tell. The conductor straightened. "We'll arrive soon." "At what?" He didn't answer. He just tipped his cap and moved on. I pressed my palm over the ticket. Heat pulsed through it, syncing with the beat of the rails. It was stronger than before, almost unbearable, but I didn't pull away. If the train was dragging me toward what I'd avoided, I wanted to feel it, wanted to know. The car grew colder. Breath fogged the air. Shadows thickened between the lamps until they bent shapes across the seats, shapes that didn't match the passengers sitting in them. The train slowed. Ahead, through the glass, a station emerged. Not earth this time, not wood. It was built of stone, black and slick, carved with lines that hurt to look at. No name marked it. No sign hung above the platform, but I knew it. Recognition punched through me like cold water. It was not a place I'd been. It was a place I'd dreamed, again and again, across years. Always the same. The black stone station, the waiting platform, the sense that stepping onto it would mean never waking up. The train shuddered to a halt. The doors opened. Air spilled in, icy sharp, threaded with whispers that might have been voices, or the sound of stone remembering its weight. The ticket on the table burned so hot it curled, the word NX searing brighter, glowing like coal. The conductor stood by the open doorway, his shadow long across the aisle. "Your stop," he said. I shook my head. "This place isn't real." "Neither is the train," he replied, "but both are waiting." The whispers outside thickened, words just beyond meaning, pressing against my skull. The passengers didn't move. Not one of them looked at me, as if my decision wasn't theirs to witness. The heat of the tickets seared my palm. Smoke rose from the paper, and still it didn't burn away. The word glowed, insisting. NX. I stood, legs trembling, every part of me screaming to sit back down, to let the doors close, to let the train move on. But my feet carried me toward the open platform anyway. The stone waited. The stone platform swallowed the sound of my step, drinking it down so completely that for a moment I thought I hadn't moved at all. Cold climbed through my shoes into my legs, deeper than weather, the kind of cold that remembers centuries. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of whispers pressed into silence. Above, the sky was neither night nor day, an endless slate gray, smeared as if someone had rubbed out the stars with their thumb. Behind me, the train waited, quiet, its lamps dim, its windows blank. The conductor stood framed in the open doorway, hat low, unreadable. He did not call me back. He did not urge me forward. He simply existed, an anchor I could no longer touch. The station stretched wide, the black stone blocks fitted together too neatly, without seam or mortar. They pulsed faintly beneath my feet, a rhythm just slower than my heartbeat, like the ground itself was alive and patient. No benches, no signs, no clocks, only a single archway ahead, carved with symbols I almost recognized. They twisted when I looked too long, slipping away from the corners of comprehension. I walked forward because standing still felt worse. The archway yawned into a corridor, narrow, the walls lined with carvings, faces, thousands of them, pressed in shallow relief, some screaming, some calm, some watching with eyes that bulged too wide. Their mouths moved faintly, opening and closing without sound, but I felt their words sliding against the inside of my skull. At the corridor's end stood a door, not wood, not metal, stone again, darker than the rest. No handle, no hinges, just a flat surface, carved with a shape that was horribly familiar. It was me. The outline was rough, simplified, but there was no mistaking it. My shoulders, my stance, the tilt of my head, I hated in photographs. Beneath it, words carved shallow. Return. My throat closed. The whispers swelled. The faces in the walls pressed closer, their stone lips stretching wider. I reached out, though every part of me screamed not to. My fingers brushed the carving. The stone was warm, too warm. The outline rippled under my touch like water disturbed by a pebble. The door shuddered, cracks spidered outward from the carving. The sound of stone breaking filled the corridor, low and final. The door split down the center and began to open. Beyond was not a room, not a hall, not anything built. It was a field, not the one I'd just left, not the town's hollow echo. This was emptier, vaster, a plain stretching under that same gray sky, and in the middle of it stood a figure, me, not a reflection, not a double, just me, standing still, hands at my sides, watching with eyes I recognized too well. I spoke, though his lips never moved. You left everything. You left us. You left yourself. How long do you think you can run? The words filled my chest as though I'd said them. The stone door behind me slammed shut. The echo rolled across the endless plain. The other me took a step closer. The other me stepped closer. The soundless plain carrying no echo, no rhythm of footsteps. His clothes matched mine exactly, down to the blood drying on the hand from the cut I'd made earlier. His face was mine, but stripped of hesitation. No fear in the eyes, no tremor in the jaw, just steadiness, cold and sharp. You thought you could outrun this, he said, and though his mouth never moved, the voice bloomed inside my skull. Every choice you left behind, every place you abandoned, they don't vanish, they wait, and they grow, until you come back. I didn't come back, I whispered. My throat was tight, raw from words I hadn't said aloud. The train brought me. His smile was thin, because the train knows what you avoid longer than you do. The plane stretched endless in every direction. No escape, no train, just him, me and the horizon locked in gray. My heart hammered, but my legs rooted to the ground as he drew closer, stopping only an arm's length away. You left them, he said. The town, the faces. You left everything unfinished, and you told yourself that made you free. But here you are, with me. I wanted to turn, to run, but the plane offered nowhere to run to. I wanted to deny him, but the words stuck in my chest, lies refusing to leave. He extended a hand. Come back, return, fill the space, become whole. The word return seared in my memory, carved above the stone door. My hand trembled at my side. I knew if I touched him, I'd sink into him, be folded back into the self I'd fled. The unfinished life, the choices I'd buried, would take me whole. I'm not you anymore, I said. My voice cracked, but I forced the words out. I chose to leave. I'll keep choosing it. His eyes narrowed. The steadiness faltered, a flicker of something desperate showing beneath. You can't, he said, softer now, as if pleading. You can't live without me. You can't live without what you abandoned. If you deny me, there's nothing left. No return, no arrival, just next. The ticket in my pocket pulsed hot again. I pulled it out. The word NX glowed brighter, burning through the paper until only the light remained, hovering in my palm. The plane rippled beneath us, trembling. My double stepped back, face twisting, not in anger, but in fear. Don't, he whispered. The light flared, a sharp white that cut through the endless gray. The plane cracked, the horizon splintering like glass struck by a hammer. The other me dissolved into smoke, unraveling into the fissures, his voice breaking apart into 100 half-formed words. The ground gave way. I fell. And then rails, the clatter of wheels, the hum of lamps. I slammed into my seat in the train car, chest heaving, ticket ash crumbling in my hand. The teenagers stared, wide-eyed. The man with the briefcase had vanished, his seat empty, his absence heavy as stone. The conductor stood at the end of the aisle. His cap shadowed his eyes, but I felt the weight of his gaze. He inclined his head once. You refused, he said, so the train will keep you. The lamps steadied. The rhythm of the rails continued, endless. Outside the window, there was no landscape now, only darkness, stretching forever, unbroken. The scarf still lay across Mara's empty seat, but it was no longer ash gray. It was gone entirely, as if she had never been. I leaned back, the car rocking around me, the rails singing their two-part song. My chest still burned with the echo of that word. Next, and I understood, there would always be another stop, another station, another choice I had avoided long enough to be dragged back to. The train would never end, not until I returned. But I had fought once. I could fight again. The bell appeared on the table before me, gleaming faintly in the dim light. My reflection bent in its curve, tired, stubborn, still mine. I didn't touch it, not yet. The train carried me on, endless, into the dark. Now, on to the next story. The lawyer's email said the house had been waiting for me a very long time, which is not a kind thing to say to someone who's never had a place wait for them at all. He attached scans of brittle deeds and a family tree with too many gaps, then directions drawn by hand, as if the route wanted ink more than satellites. I drove anyway, because the idea of ownership, of being the person with keys, felt like a dare. I didn't know how to refuse. The town before the turnoff had a main street the size of a grocery aisle. The diner's sign read pie in letters, missing their light on one side, and the hardware store advertised kerosene like it was a seasonal fruit. When I asked the man behind the gas station counter how far it was to the old Thorn place, he stopped ringing up my coffee and looked at me like a person assessing whether you've come by your face honestly. It keeps itself, he said finally, and handed me the change without counting it. The road to the house wasn't really a road. The GPS sighed and gave up 2 miles back. Here, the lanes narrowed into a ribbon of broken asphalt stitched together with dirt and old leaves. Branches leaned close, curious. The sun filtered down in the particular tired way of late afternoon in October, making the world look like it had been developed in a dark room by a patient hand. When the iron gates appeared, they did it like a magic trick with no audience. One turn, and there they were, flung open, the metal scrolled with vines and initials that could have been mine if you didn't look closely. I stopped in front of them because that felt required. The stone pillars that held the hinges were veined with lichen, names and dates carved shallowly into them in 100 hands. Some I recognized from the family tree the lawyer sent, a great-grandfather whose photo had been all mustache and disappointment, a woman with my mother's eyes and no dates after her marriage. Others were just scratches that looked like children practicing letters on rock. The right pillar had a new mark, fresh enough that the stones still looked surprised. It was my surname, the letters careful, the date blank. The drive curved through trees, uphill, as if I had to earn the view one incline at a time. The first sight of the house came all at once, a sudden clearing, and there it sat, broad and tired, and beautiful in spite of itself. 3 stories, gray stone on the bottom, weathered clapboard above, a porch that wrapped around the front like a patient embrace. The windows were tall and narrow, with panes that made the sky look like it had been politely divided and then reassembled. A cupola sat on top like a small lighthouse that had gotten lost. No other houses in sight. The hill fell away behind, and the forest took over again, close as breath. In the driveway, my car looked like it had arrived to apologize. I left the engine running until I realized that was a kind of superstition, then killed it and listened to the quiet that replaced it. Not the deep quiet of wilderness. This quiet had texture. You could hear birds, the distant complaint of a branch, an insect drawing a line through the air. Beneath that, something softer, rhythmic, like fabric breathing. The key the lawyer had couriered to me was old brass warm from my pocket. The front door lock turned more easily than it had any right to, the bolt sliding back with the obedience of a habit. The door itself was heavy, the kind that insists on your full attention. It swung inward on hinges that didn't squeal. The smell hit first. Dust that had been taught manners, wood that had been waxed by hands that believed in circles, something sweet, like dried lavender, outstaying its welcome. The foyer was the kind of room built to impress a century that cared about thresholds. A wide staircase rose in 2 flights, with a landing between them, where a window threw a rectangle of pale light across the runner. To the left, a parlor with a fireplace and a mirror over it, big enough to judge you fully. To the right, a room that had been a library, if the shelves were any indication. The floorboards were old and sounded like it when I stepped on them, not creaky so much as conversational. Someone had dusted recently, not perfectly. Corners still held gray outlines of what had been, but the surfaces were clean in a way that didn't match the idea of a house empty for decades. I told myself a groundskeeper could have been by, a neighbor who remembered the place with affection. I did not say aloud what part of me had already decided. The house had done this for me. In the library, the books were arranged by size, not subject. Tall atlases beside slim volumes of sermons, a medical text with plates of ruined organs, standing next to a book of love poems that had been opened so often its spine looked like a set of ribs. On the desk by the window sat a ledger, not ancient, the paper still white. A pen lay across it like someone had just stepped away. The top page had a date written at the corner. Today's, in a hand that looked like a careful imitation of mine. A small line waited beneath. Arrived. I didn't write it. The ink was already dry. The mirror over the parlor fireplace had not been made to flatter. It gave you back your bones first, and dealt with your skin as an afterthought. I stood in front of it and saw the travel in my face, the road's dust, the ache of bad coffee, the last 6 months of pretending a job meant a life. Behind me, in the glass, the foyer seemed taller, the staircase steeper, the landing window narrower, as if the mirror had been instructed by an older version of the house. I glanced over my shoulder at the real staircase and found it exactly as it should be. When I looked back at the mirror, the rectangle of light on the landing had shifted 3 inches, like afternoon had been tugged forward, a fraction in the reflection alone. It made my stomach swing. I turned away because sometimes sanity is just choosing to be impolite to a room. The kitchen was in the back, where the light was gentler. Someone had pulled a table close to the window that looked over a little walled garden gone to seed. The sink was deep and white with hairline cracks like a map. The stove was newer than everything else, a practical modern gas range that made me feel a conviction I couldn't name. Drawers opened on the first try. A knife block held knives with edges maintained by a person who liked the feeling of a blade making a case for itself. In the pantry, the jars were labeled in the same tidy hand I'd seen in the ledger. Flour, salt, tea. The tea tin was full. Not ancient, not damp. Leaves that smelled like a morning where someone else is up first and made decisions you don't have to question. I boiled water because doing something ordinary in the middle of extraordinary is a way to make friends with yourself. The kettle hissed. The radiators sang to themselves once and then chose silence. When I poured, the steam rose like a small ghost and didn't set off the smoke detector, which felt like luck or a bargain. I took the mug to the back steps and sat. The garden had paths under the weeds, brick laid in a herringbone pattern that someone with strong knees must have been proud of. A stone bench waited beneath a lilac bush that had lost its mind some years ago and then found it again in the wrong shape. The gate at the end of the path hung crooked but closed exactly. Farther out past the garden wall, the slope ran down into a meadow and then a line of trees, an old path cut into the grass, barely there, leading into the shade. If I stared, I could convince myself there was movement among the trunks. Not animals, the kind of movement you feel when a room remembers a conversation after the people leave. The tea was perfect, and I can't explain how. I hadn't timed it, hadn't measured, hadn't done anything with intention beyond wanting it, and still it carried the precise heat and bite that makes you glad to have a tongue. I told myself I was exhausted and graciously accepted the universe's decision to make one thing easy. The back door closed behind me without a sound. I hadn't closed it. I got up and turned the handle. It opened as smoothly as if oil had been invented for this moment. When I stepped back inside, I could have sworn one of the chairs at the kitchen table had shifted to be more welcoming. Upstairs, the air had a different quality, as if the house had been breathing there longer. The landing window's light fell across a runner, worn down the center by 1,000 feet, that knew where they were going. The hall stretched past 4 doors, 2 on the left, 2 on the right. The first room on the left had been a bedroom, and looked like it still was. A quilt lay on the bed in a pattern that made geometry feel like affection. The wallpaper had flowers so small they read as texture, unless you were rude enough to squint. On the dresser, a hairbrush waited, its handle worn where a thumb had reminded it of its duty for years. A photograph leaned against the mirror, a woman on the porch I'd walked past, chin tilted like she trusted angles. Her hair was a darker version of mine, and her mouth was mine, stubborn in the middle and unfortunate in profile. On the back, in that same careful hand, one word, stay. The word had been written over something else, pressed harder than necessary to cover it. The scratch of the original still showed through if you turned the card to the light. Leave. I put the photograph face down because I didn't like being given both choices at once. The second room on the left had been a nursery once, then a sewing room, then something else. Light pooled in it like it had been waiting. On the floor lay a hoop with fabric stretched tight, a needle thrust through and left as if someone had been called away and said, "I'll be right back," and then never remembered what thread she'd been using. The pattern was a house, not this house, a simpler shape with a door in the center, windows like eyes that invite you in and make you sorry on purpose. A few stitches in the corner had been pulled out, the thread cut short. The smallest and most practical part of me wanted to put the needle away, complete the line, reclaim the dignity of finishing a stranger's task. The rest of me recognized a trap. Across the hall, the first room on the right was bare except for a chair facing the window, and an old-school map rolled into a tube leaning in the corner. I unrolled it because curiosity is just hunger that wore a tie. It showed county boundaries drawn in colors with names that didn't stick. Someone had circled our bit of map in red pencil and drawn a line out to the side where a word had been written and then erased clumsily. I could make out a letter or two. The last one was S. The second room on the right was locked. The key from the front door didn't fit. I tried not to want it too much. The upstairs hall ended in a door that led to the narrow back staircase, enclosed and steep, built for servants or for secrets. The air in that stairwell felt older than the rest of the house, like the dust there had opinions. I climbed carefully, counting the steps because people who count steps don't fall. They didn't squeal or groan or buckle. They accepted me like an old friend who doesn't insist on small talk. The third floor was half finished, half attic, the kind of space children make kingdoms out of. Slanted ceilings, odd corners, trunks whose locks were too serious for what they guarded. A small door in the angle of the roof opened on a crawl space that breathed cold on my face with the intimacy of someone about to tell me news. I closed it and put a trunk in front of it, because bravery is a resource you don't spend on the first day. The cupola stairs were narrower still. Halfway up, the air thinned in a way that wasn't just physics. At the top, the small octagonal room had windows on all sides. The house looked out over itself, and the trees and the town beyond the trees, and whatever else the world needed a witness for. Dust motes turned in the light, like a small conscientious galaxy. On the windowsill sat a box the size of two hands cupped together, not ornate. Plain wood with a lid that slid. It moved under my fingers with the inexorable courtesy of old things. Inside lay a handful of objects arranged with care. A ring with a stone so small it proposed rather than boasted. A square of folded paper brittle with handling. A key that did not belong to any door I had tried. A lock of hair tied with blue thread that had faded into a color the sky would have to apologize for. The paper crackled when I unfolded it. A list, written in that same tidy hand, the letters marching without hurry. Water on it main, sweep both chimneys, oil hinges on cellar door, call on Mrs. Holler next valley. She will have eggs. Below that, a line drawn later, the ink darker. If you hear them, it is only the house. Let it finish. The room tilted. The instructions were ridiculous and common and exactly right. Of course the chimneys needed sweeping. Of course the water would have to be turned on. Of course there was a neighbor with eggs. Of course the house had a sound, and it was entitled to use it. I put the list back in the box and slid the lid shut with both hands like closing a sleeping child's door. On the way down, a floorboard on the second floor sighed under my weight with a tone I hadn't heard before. It sounded like someone else had just stepped where I did. I stopped and went still, the way animals do when the air changes. Nothing moved. The hall lay long and polite and empty. I told myself I had been listening too attentively to the wrong things for too long. It's easy to hear a house when you're excited to be the person who gets to hear it. The light outside was breaking down into its last beautiful fragments when I went hunting for the cellar. The door was under the back stairs, a cliché so functional it had become architecture. The knob turned with more resistance than the others, and the hinges insisted on narrating in a high, complaining voice, which felt honest after all the politeness. The smell that came up was earth and old iron, and something faintly sweet like apples left too long. I found the switch with the muscle memory of someone else's childhood. Bare bulb, pull chain, the light swinging as if it was unsettled about being asked to exist. The stairs were steep and uneven, and clearly not up to code in any century. At the bottom, the floor was packed dirt with a scatter of brick, like a memory of someone trying to make it polite. The walls were stone, old enough to have grown opinions about how to hold up houses. A workbench sagged under the weight of tools that would outlast 3 generations of decisions. The main water valve sat in a niche like a king pretending to be humble. It was stiff, but it moved. Pipes juddered. Far away in the house, something thumped once, twice, the sound of rooms remembering mouths. A small stream of rusty water bled into the laundry sink and then cleared itself, the way bodies do. I stood with my hand on the valve longer than necessary because it felt like holding something's pulse. When I let go, the quiet that followed wasn't silence, it was approval. I oiled the cellar door hinges because doing the thing the list had asked felt like passing a test I hadn't studied for. The oil smelled like old pennies and rescued bicycles. The hinges thanked me with a tone that made the hair on my arms consider standing. On my way back through the kitchen, I found that someone had set a plate on the table, a heel of bread, and a slice of cheese, a small dish with 3 olives on it, like punctuation. I had not put it there. I did not own olives. For a long minute, I stood with my hands at my sides and let my body learn the shape of being offered something. Then I ate it, because refusing hospitality is a thing you only do if you plan to leave immediately, and I was not going anywhere. The light outside gave up its last arguments. The house took on that particular blue of evening that makes ordinary rooms look like they've been arranged by a museum. I found the switch in the parlor, but didn't flip it. The radiators woke one by one in different rooms, small size, tiny clicks, as if the house were adjusting its shawl. When I passed the mirror over the fireplace again, my reflection looked more like I remembered myself, which felt like the kind of trick you thank a place for. I chose the bedroom with the quilt. The sheets were cool and not musty, and I refused to think too hard about who had turned them down. I put my bag on the chair, and the chair stood up to it without offense. Outside, the wind decided to thread the lilac branches in a way that sounded like a whisper, and then, embarrassed by its own cliché, chose to be wind again. On the nightstand, the hairbrush lay with its bristles clean. I have never brushed my hair before bed in my life. I did it anyway, because some manners are contagious. There were no photographs on the walls in that room, except the one I'd turned face down, but when I switched off the light, the space retained a memory of faces, not frightening, just present, the way addicts remember hats. The house made a sound then, not a creak, not a pipe, not an animal nesting, a voice somewhere above me, not words, the shape of them, the way someone in the next room sounds when they think you're asleep and they don't want to wake you, but can't help talking. It moved along the hall, past the locked room, toward the back stairs. I lay still, eyes open to the dark, and let it finish, because the note had told me to, and because I wanted the right to be trusted with instructions. When it ebbed, when the house exhaled, the night settled into a version of quiet that belonged to this place particularly. Sleep came with it, not like a door closing, more like a heavy coat being draped over my shoulders. If there were dreams, they stayed behind my eyes and did not make a case about themselves. I woke at a time I would have called 3 if I had been allowed to keep numbers. The room had the exact dark of the hour just before nothing forgives anything. Something sat at the end of the bed. A weight, not human heavy, not cat-light, the kind of weight you only feel when someone who used to sit there does it again because it's their habit and you are new to it. I didn't move, I said, into the pillow, because speaking to the darkness demands a kind of courtesy. I hear you. The weight lifted. The floorboard near the door replied in the same tone it had used earlier, the one that meant you are not alone and that has to be okay. Morning came in a sheet of pale orange laid across the foot of the bed. The house smelled like toast, though the kitchen did not yet have any. When I went downstairs, the ledger in the library had acquired a new line, woke, and beneath it another, in smaller script, as if written by a different hand holding the same pen. You are not the first. I touched the page with 2 fingers and left no smudge. The day outside was cold enough to make the breath from my coffee visible. The path into the trees behind the garden looked less like an idea and more like an invitation. There were eggs in a basket on the back stoop, 6 brown, 1 blue, straw tucked around them like a promise. A scrap of paper lay under the handle, the name Haller printed in blocks, and the word welcome written below in a script that must have been taught by the same teacher who had taught the ledger its manners. I stood on the step with the eggs warm in my hands and the house behind me, watching through every window, and knew something that made my heart feel both too small and too big for my chest. The waiting had not been patient. It had been practiced. The house had not just kept itself. It had kept a version of me ready. When I turned back into the kitchen, the chair that had shifted yesterday was exactly where I would have put it if I'd wanted to sit and write a letter to someone I wasn't sure would answer. The pen waited by the ledger. The instructions in the cupola were still in their box, like a friend who knows when to leave the room. Somewhere upstairs, the locked door remembered its lock. The path in the trees was not going to stop being a path. I cracked 2 eggs into a pan, and the sizzle made a sound like permission. When I sat down to eat, the chair sighed in a way that felt like relief. I told the house I would stay the week. I spoke it aloud because the list had asked me to let it finish, and this seemed fair as payment. The word stay made the air in the room change temperature by a degree only the kind of body I had when I was a child could register. I ate my breakfast like someone being watched kindly, which is always both a comfort and an obligation. When I went to the front hall to fetch my coat, I found my surname, on the stone pillar outside the door, had gained its date, not a span with a hyphen, just a beginning. The ending waited, blank, as if it believed it would get to be the one to decide. The second morning, the house woke me before the light did, not with sound exactly, but with a shift in air pressure, as though the walls had leaned inward to whisper. My eyes opened in the gray before dawn, and I knew, without looking, that the locked room down the hall was no longer locked. I didn't rise right away. The quilt held me in place like a polite hand. The quiet pressed until it became a question. What are you waiting for? I padded down the hall barefoot, each board humming slightly under my weight, as though confirming my presence. The door stood ajar, just enough to prove it had never been a secret at all. I pushed it open. The room was small, square, plain, no wallpaper, just plaster the color of bones. A bed frame leaned against the far wall, bare. In the center stood a table. On it, another ledger. This one thinner, the cover leather worn soft, edges dark with oil from hands that had wanted to remember. I opened it. Names filled the pages, not hundreds, dozens, each written carefully, each with 2 dates, birth and death. The last 4 names were familiar, pulled from the lawyer's tree. Family. Each ending date matched the year they had gone missing in town records. Beneath those names, a line drawn and left blank. My surname waited at the margin, a space reserved. I touched the page with my fingertip. The ink was fresh. The house, it seemed, was patient but not endless. The floorboard behind me gave a sigh. I turned, expecting a draft, expecting empty hall. Instead, there was a girl, 12, maybe 13, dark hair, pale dress, eyes far too calm for a child. She stood barefoot, hands clasped in front of her. "You shouldn't be here," she said. My throat closed. "Neither should you." She tilted her head, not unkindly. "I was born here. I'll always be here. What's your name?" She looked at the ledger, then back at me. "Which one?" I stepped closer. "Did the house keep you?" Her expression didn't change. "The house doesn't keep. It remembers. We're the ones who keep. Some of us don't let go." A draft stirred the pages of the ledger. The blank line with my name fluttered once. Waiting, the girl took a step back into the hall. "If you leave today, it won't follow. If you stay," her voice thinned. "Staying writes it down. Why warn me?" She almost smiled. "Because once someone warned me." She turned and walked toward the back stairs. Her figure grew thin, then thinner, until she was no longer a girl but a shadow keeping pace with the wallpaper. By the time I followed, the hall was empty. The ledger on the table still lay open. My name at the margin pulsed faintly, as though ink could breathe. I closed the book and set it gently aside. The house gave no protest. Not yet. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of coffee that had already been poured. On the table sat a cup, steam rising. I hadn't made it. I sat at the table staring at the cup. The steam rose in steady spirals, the smell rich and sharp, exactly the way I would have made it if I'd gotten up first. The chair across from me had been pulled out just slightly, the way you do when you're expecting company. I didn't sit in that one. I took the cup and sipped. Hot, perfect, undeniable. "You're making this very difficult," I said aloud, not sure whether I was talking to the house or myself. The radiators clicked in what might have been amusement. I decided to test it. I gathered my bag, slung my coat on, and walked to the front door. The brass knob was cool, polite. The lock turned easily. I stepped onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. The morning was crisp, the sky a clear pale blue. The drive stretched away, gravel crunching under my boots. I could see the gate at the bottom of the hill, iron bars black against the sunlit trees. Halfway down, I stopped. The gate looked different, taller, the scrolled vines sharper, more deliberate. The initials at the center gleamed fresh, as if they'd been polished overnight. My surname carved in the pillar now carried more than the beginning date. The line after it wasn't blank anymore. It read only one word: stay. I walked faster, heart hammering. The gate stood wide open, just as it had when I arrived. Beyond it, the road waited. The ordinary world waited. I stepped through and found myself at the top of the drive again, gravel crunching under my boots, the house sprawling in front of me as if I'd never left. I froze. The air was the same, my breath still fogged in the morning chill. The coffee in my hand was still warm, but I was back where I'd begun. The front door opened with a soft groan. The foyer yawned wide, the staircase polite, the ledger waiting on its desk. "You warned me," I whispered to the girl who wasn't there. The radiators sighed. The smell of toast drifted from the kitchen. I stood there on the porch, bag over my shoulder, heart racing. The house hadn't locked me in. The door was open, but it had folded the road until it led only to itself. I could try again, keep walking, keep running until my legs gave out. Or I could turn back inside, sit at the table that always had food ready, sleep in the bed already warmed, let the ledger keep filling itself until it reached the end. The wind picked up, threading through the lilac bush. The sound wasn't a whisper this time. It was a word, low and certain, spoken in 100 voices at once. Choose. I walked back into the house because the cold morning wasn't answering any questions. The door closed behind me without my hand on it, the bolt sliding in with the easy confidence of a habit. Inside, the light had shifted. The foyer looked brighter, not with sunlight, but with something older, the kind of glow wood keeps after a century of being touched and polished. The staircase runner was straighter than it had been yesterday. The parlor mirror caught me again. This time my reflection wasn't alone. Standing half a step behind me in the glass was the girl, hair pale in the light, her eyes steady. I spun around. The foyer was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, so was the reflection. Only me, tired-eyed, hair out of place, holding a half-cold cup of coffee. I walked into the library. The ledger lay open, as if it had been waiting all night. A new line had appeared beneath the last. Slept, woke, returned. None of it was in my handwriting, but the strokes were practiced, careful, unmistakably mine. The books on the shelves had changed. Yesterday they'd been arranged by height. Now they were in order by color, a gradient from pale to dark. A single red book sat out of place, leaning crooked near the center of the shelves. I pulled it down. No title on the spine, no author inside, just photographs pasted carefully onto each page. Every photo was of the house, the porch, the parlor, the kitchen, the upstairs hall. Some in daylight, some in rain, some blurred as though whoever had taken them hadn't meant to. But in every one of them there was a figure, sometimes faint, sometimes clear, sometimes facing away, sometimes directly at the lens, always the same figure, always me. The last photo was different. It showed the library, this room, this very shelf. The photo was pinned to the page with a brass tack that had bled rust into the paper. I looked closer. In the picture, I stood at the shelves with the red book in my hand, looking down at it just as I was now. Something shifted behind me. I turned. The chair at the desk was no longer empty. My coat was draped across its back. My bag sat neatly at its legs, zipped, dust brushed from its canvas. The pen on the ledger twitched once, like a compass needle catching a new direction. The house had rearranged my belongings for me, as though I'd already decided to stay. Then the upstairs floorboards groaned, deliberate, one step, then another, moving toward the back staircase. The same sound I'd heard in the night, except this time it didn't stop. Step by step, it came closer, slow and unhurried, like someone who had never needed to rush. The smell of lavender thickened, crawling down the hall. I set the red book back on the shelf, hands unsteady, and waited for whatever was about to come down the stairs. The steps stopped just above the landing. Silence filled the house, not empty but swollen, the kind of pause that comes before someone says your name. I held my breath without meaning to. Then the sound resumed, deliberate, slow, one tread after another. The back staircase gave up its occupant, the way an old throat gives up a secret. A man appeared in the doorway. His frame was tall but thinned by time, shoulders slightly stooped, hair gray at the edges. He wore a suit that might have been fashionable 50 years ago, pressed neat, though the fabric shimmered faintly, like smoke trying to remember the shape of cloth. His face, it was mine, older, worn, but with a calm certainty I couldn't have faked. He looked at me with the familiarity of a mirror. "You came back," he said. His voice was steady, but carried the echo of walls and floorboards as though the house was speaking with him. I couldn't answer at first. My mouth went dry. "I never lived here," I managed finally. He smiled, faint, tired. "Not yet, but you will. We all do. The house remembers us before we remember it." He crossed the library, his steps soft, the air bending around him. When he reached the ledger, He touched the pen with one long finger. The ink bled onto the page, forming a new word without pressure: stay. I shook my head. You're not real. Neither is leaving, he replied gently. You tried. The gate sent you back. The road folds. The world outside is just rehearsal. This is the stage. The radiators hissed in agreement. Warm breath in the walls. The older version of me turned toward the red book I had returned to the shelf. He pulled it free again, opening to the last photograph, the one of me standing exactly where I was now. He angled it toward me. Do you see? There are no accidents here. The picture shimmered, its surface rippling. A new figure was forming behind me in the photograph. The girl, her face sharp this time, no blur, her eyes locked on mine. Some of us resist, the older me said, not looking at the picture anymore. But resistance only feeds the memory. The house writes everything down. He closed the book and set it on the desk beside the ledger. His hand lingered on the cover. You'll learn, he said. It's better if you accept. Then he was gone, not in a blink, not in a vanish. He simply stepped toward the shelves, and the shelves took him, his body thinning into shadow between the spines, until only the faint smell of lavender remained. The house settled again. The boards relaxed. The radiators sighed. But the ledger page was still open. The word stay glowed faintly in the ink. And upstairs, from the locked room I had found open this morning, came the sound of something being dragged slowly across the floor. The dragging continued, steady and patient, a sound that seemed to mark its own rhythm against the walls. I left the library, every step echoing longer than it should, and climbed the stairs. The hall smelled stronger of lavender now, cloying, as if the flowers had been crushed into the plaster. The door to the once locked room stood wide open. Inside, the furniture had rearranged itself. The table was pushed to the far wall. In the center of the floor was a trunk, iron-bound, scarred by decades of handling. Its lid was half open, just enough for the sound to come from within, the dragging of something heavy along unseen ground. I stepped closer. The air around the trunk was colder, damp, carrying the smell of earth turned fresh by a spade. I knelt, hands trembling, and lifted the lid. The inside was deeper than the box had any right to be. It wasn't wood-lined. It was stone, like the mouth of a well. Darkness went down and down, swallowing light. From within it came the dragging noise, then a pause, then a breath. Not mine, not human. A hand appeared at the edge, thin gray, with nails too long, fingers slick with soil. It gripped the lip of the trunk and pulled. Another hand followed, arms, shoulders, a head. The figure that hauled itself up looked like family photographs, left too long in damp attics, features blurred, clothes indistinct, the whole shape warped by memory's decay. Yet its face tilted toward me with recognition, as if it knew exactly who I was. You came, it rasped, voice like wood dragged across stone. I stumbled back, but the room had grown smaller, the walls leaning closer, the ceiling lower. The figure climbed out of the trunk fully now, standing tall, taller than the doorframe, shadows dripping from its shoulders. Behind it, the trunk's depth glowed faintly, showing not just stone, but faces pressed against the walls, mouths open, eyes blank, hundreds of them watching in silence. The figure took one step forward. The floor groaned, not from weight, but from agreement. The house remembers, it said again, clearer this time, and so will you. The door slammed shut behind me. The lavender smell thickened until it was choking. The figure reached out its hand, fingers stretching toward my chest. The ledger downstairs creaked open on its own, pages fluttering. I felt the house waiting, patient, certain, as if this moment had been rehearsed for generations. The figure's hand pressed against my chest, not hard but insistent, like the weight of memory itself. Cold seeped through my ribs, down into my lungs, until every breath tasted of earth and stone. The walls of the room trembled, faint cracks appearing in the plaster, as if the house itself leaned closer to witness. My heart pounded beneath its touch. With each beat, I saw flashes behind my eyes, faces I had never met but recognized, rooms from the house in different eras, the same staircase lit by different lamps, the same hall lined with different wallpaper. Generations flickered through me in an instant, too fast to name, too complete to forget. "You are written," the figure said, and its voice was not its own anymore. It carried dozens layered together, men, women, children, all speaking as one. "You cannot unwrite what has already been remembered." I tried to move back, but the floor would not let me. My feet sank into the boards as though they'd softened into tar. The figure leaned closer, its blurred face brushing mine without touch. Its eyes were black hollows, yet behind them something shifted, tiny glimmers, hundreds of them, like candle flames shivering in the dark. Then the trunk behind it groaned again. Another hand appeared, another, then another. More figures began climbing out, each warped differently, some tall and skeletal, others stooped and heavy, some with faces melted into smooth planes, others carrying far too many eyes. Each one dragged itself forward, and the room did not resist them. The walls stretched, the ceiling lifted, the space expanding to accommodate what should never have fit. The first figure withdrew its hand from my chest. My body shuddered with the release, but the cold stayed inside, anchored. It turned and faced the others as they emerged. Then, in perfect unison, they all looked at me. "You are the last," they said together, and the floorboards rattled with the weight of it. From the hall, the girl's voice broke through, thin and urgent. "Don't let them touch you again." The door shivered, the knob rattling, as though she pulled from the other side. But the figures moved faster now, their limbs unfolding too long, their mouths opening with the sound of hinges tearing free. The air thickened until breathing felt like drowning. The ledger downstairs slammed shut with a crack that shook the entire house. The nearest figure stepped forward, arms stretching toward me. The black hollows of its eyes flared bright, and for the first time, I understood they weren't hollows at all. They were windows, and inside them, the house was staring back. The window eyes locked on me, and I felt the weight of the house press inward from every side. The walls bent closer, the ceiling dipped, the air itself tightened like a fist. My pulse pounded in my throat, in my skull, in the boards beneath my feet. Each beat echoed back to me, not alone, but multiplied, like the hearts of everyone who had ever stood where I stood still, lingered in the rhythm. The figures circled, dragging themselves fully out of the trunk. Their voices bled together in a hum too low for language. My vision blurred at the edges, not from fear, but from something heavier, a pull behind my eyes, as if they wanted to rewrite what I was seeing into something the house preferred. The girl's voice cut through again, muffled through the wood. "They want you to take the place, don't let them." The nearest figure extended its arm again. Its hand no longer looked warped. It looked exactly like mine, pale scar on the knuckle, nail bitten too short. I recoiled, but the floor held me fast. My own hand twitched in answer, as though drawn to meet it. "Be written," the voices said together, calm, inexorable. "Every house needs a keeper." The trunk yawned wider, stone sides pushing out, as though the well beneath it was bottomless. Faces pressed harder against the walls of its depth, mouths working soundlessly, their eyes shining with the same window light. The girl screamed then, her voice sharp enough to splinter the moment. The knob rattled violently, then the door burst open. She stood framed in the doorway, hair wild, face pale with fury. She didn't look like a child anymore. She looked like the kind of memory that refuses to die. She hurled something into the room, small, sharp. It clattered across the floor to my feet. A key, not brass like the front door, iron black, heavy, etched with lines that didn't belong to any locksmith. "Use it," she shouted. The figures recoiled, their blurred forms flickering, as though the sight of the key unsettled them. The floor released my feet enough for me to bend and snatch it up. The iron was icy, burning cold against my skin. The figures moaned, their hum unraveling into discord. The girl's voice dropped to a whisper, but I heard it as clearly as breath in my ear. "There's only one lock it fits. You'll know when you see it." The walls shook violently then, dust sifting down from the ceiling. The figures surged forward, arms stretching, mouths opening wide enough to split their faces. The trunk behind them roared like wind sucked into the earth. I gripped the key tighter, its weight pulling at me like it wanted to be used. My chest heaved, the room tilted, and through the chaos, one thought burned sharper than fear. The house wasn't only remembering me, it was trying to keep me, and the key was the only thing that didn't belong to it. The figures lunged, their arms outstretched, voices breaking into a howl that rattled my teeth. The trunk roared wider, its stone mouth splitting the floor, dragging the air downward. Dust and splinters whipped into the vortex. The house itself groaned, every beam and nail straining, like the walls wanted to collapse inward and trap me forever. I ran, not for the stairs, not for the door. My body knew before my mind did. The key burned in my fist, pulling like a compass, down the hall, past the bedrooms, past the nursery with its unfinished embroidery, to the narrow back staircase. The girl's footsteps pattered just ahead of mine, though she never looked back. We burst into the kitchen. The smell of lavender followed, thick and suffocating. Behind us, the figures thundered down the hall, the boards sagging under their weightless steps. The radiators screamed, pipes banging like fists against the walls. The cellar door loomed beneath the back stairs. Its hinges gleamed with the oil I'd given them, as though they had been waiting for this moment. The key burned hotter, nearly blistering my palm. I yanked the door open. Cold air surged up, smelling of iron and earth. At the bottom of the cellar steps stood a door I hadn't seen before. Stone, black, carved with lines that pulsed faintly, like veins under skin. No knob, only a keyhole shaped in the exact pattern of the iron in my hand. The girl's voice pressed into my ear. "Now, or you're theirs." The first figure slammed into the kitchen doorway, its window eyes flaring with the light of the house. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, pouring out a sound like every name I'd ever forgotten. The others crowded behind it, filling the hall, their faces pressed over one another like too many photographs in a single frame. I drove the key into the lock. The stone door shuddered. The carvings flared white, then split open like cracks in ice. A blast of wind roared outward, tearing through the cellar, rattling jars from shelves, snuffing the lavender stench like a candle. The figures screamed, their shapes flickered, unraveling like film catching fire. The trunk upstairs bellowed once more, then collapsed in on itself, with a sound like stone grinding to dust. One by one, the figures disintegrated into shadows, their window eyes flaring and winking out, until only silence remained. The cellar door glowed, the cracks spreading until the stone dissolved into nothing, leaving only blackness beyond, deep, vast, endless. The girl stood at the top of the steps now, her face pale but calm. "It won't hold forever," she said softly, "but it's enough. You broke the line. You're not written yet." Her edges flickered, her form thinning like smoke in wind. She looked at me one last time, and in her eyes I saw something like gratitude, or maybe release. Then she was gone. The blackness beyond the cellar pulsed once, then folded in on itself, leaving bare stone wall where the door had been. The key in my hand cooled, dulled, then crumbled into ash. The house groaned, lighter somehow, like tension leaving old bones. The radiators went quiet. The lavender smell faded. For the first time since I arrived, the silence felt honest. I climbed back to the kitchen. The table was empty. No bread, no olives, no waiting plate, just wood and dust. In the library, the ledger still lay open. The word stay had vanished. The line beneath my name was blank again, waiting, but the ink no longer breathed. I closed the book, slid it into a drawer, and left it there. When I opened the front door, the air outside was crisp, ordinary. The gates at the end of the drive stood exactly as I'd left them, my surname carved into the stone, but this time the date after it was gone. Not blank, erased. I walked down the drive, each crunch of gravel real, unbroken. The gates opened wider. Beyond them, the road stretched clear, sunlight warming its edges. I turned once to look back. The house stood quiet, windows reflecting only sky. For the first time, it didn't seem to be watching. Then I stepped through the gates. This time, the road did not fold. The world beyond waited, and the house, patient, endless, remembering, let me go. Now, on to the next story. They lowered the lake 3 summers in a row, and each time the water peeled back from the stones like skin drying in sun. The old causeway surfaced in sections. First a glimmering ridge of cobbles, slick with algae, then a proper path, rutted and grooved where cartwheels had once argued with it. The locals said it led nowhere now. Drowned village, drowned chapel, drowned names. A historical sign near the new marina gave you a photograph of the old valley before the dam, black and white and smug, cows knee-deep in grass, where my father taught me to cast for trout, a schoolhouse window bright with faces who had not yet learned that their town would be a reservoir. People came to take pictures in late afternoon, to stand in the warm shallows and say they could almost see the street plan under the ripples if the light cooperated. They left before dark because this is a place where people still pretend superstition is weather dependent. I came after. I told myself I was walking to tire my body enough that sleep would accept me. I told myself a lot of things that summer. On the 3rd night of the 4th drawdown, the dam authority sent out an email about emergency conservation. The town groused the way towns do when someone reminds them water costs more than money. The next morning, the shoreline reached 2 shoe lengths farther than it had at dusk. By midnight, the causeway was a solid gray spine, wet only where the lake breathed onto it. I parked in the unlit gravel behind the marina because I didn't want to explain a flashlight to anyone. August had burned down to its small blue pilot flame. Bugs stitched the air. Somewhere across the water, a barn owl practiced pronouncing the night. I stepped onto the stones, expecting the old anxiety that comes with walking where you shouldn't. Thin ice, trespass, someone else's grief. Instead, the causeway felt relieved. It gave under my shoes in ways that made sense for something that had carried weight before. It remembered feet and chose to remember mine. The lake whispered all the polite things lakes say when they are pretending to be small. I didn't use the flashlight. The moon laid a path in shy pieces between moving clouds, and anyway the stones knew where to lift and where to sink. I went by the shape of the dark, halfway out where the first warning buoy lay bellied and sad in mud. I saw the gate for the first time. Not a gate and a fence, just 2 posts of quarried granite shouldering up from the stones and leaning a fraction inward, lintel long gone. Carved into the left post, the chew marks of flood and time. Carved into the right, letters shallow as a whisper, return. The word made my stomach tip, though it was the kind of carving any bored mason might put into whatever vertical surface the valley had offered up. Floods do what editors do. They cut out the qualifiers. Past the posts, the stones widened into a little plaza. That's too grand a word. Think of a thumbprint of cobbles where the path met something that used to be solid. The water had pulled back far enough this year to show a perimeter of low wall, tumbled, slick. In the middle stood steps. They ran down into the lake at the exact angle of memory. I knew they were the steps of the old church because the sign on shore had told me so, but it would have been true even without the sign. There are only so many shapes people agree to make and remake. The top 3 steps were dry. The 4th and 5th held water like patient plates. On the 6th, my reflection waited. It didn't look like me. Not because of tricks, because the person on that step was the version I had been trying to ignore. Thinner at the edges, eyes that had learned too much about ceiling cracks at 2 in the morning. A wind moved through with no temperature in it. The lake accepted a change I couldn't name. Light shifted, not brighter, not dimmer, just more available. I thought I saw shapes below the 6th step, the suggestion of pew ends, a long aisle, corners where grief could sit and behave. I crouched, put my fingers into the shallow water, lifted them to my nose, because I am the sort of person who needs to keep proving to myself that the world still smells like itself. Mud and iron, a memory of lilies that were never here. Something knocked gently against the stones by my knee. Not a fish, wrong cadence. I reached and found a book. It should have been ruined. Paper doesn't keep its dignity underwater for 70 years. But the covers held, swollen but intact, cloth the color of the inside of a walnut shell. No title on the spine, no embossing. I pried it open with both thumbs, expecting pulp, and got legible ink. The pages didn't tear. They were heavy as wet linen, but they turned. The script was neat in that early 20th century way. Loops that had learned their own roads. A hand that had practiced its patience. Someone had kept a catalog here, not a church registry, not a ledger. Each page held a list. Each list had a date at the top and a note about rain or frost, and then each entry began with found, and then a thing, written soberly, as if the author had promised never to decorate. Found, 1 glove, brown kid left. Found, photograph, torn corner with eye and part of brow. Found, a song half hummed by no one, recognizable up to the 7th note. Lost the rest when a crow objected. Found, a ring where a ring should not be, returned to the left pocket of the summer coat hanging in the vestry. Found father's temper, uncast and still hot, quenched by the river at 2 Bend. I stood with the book in my hands while the lake pretended not to watch. I flipped deeper, pages and pages of the same attention. A town's little losses, a valley's absent-mindedness, and its repairs. Then I reached entries that had names attached. Found Mrs. Devlin's hearing in the right ear where the wind scolds. Found Eli Anders's way back to the road. Found Maggie at the ford, at last and with a laugh. The last entry on that page used my surname. Found Thorne's hour, holding as requested until the recipient is prepared to come for it. The date at the top was the day before the flood. The script did not change for my name. I didn't breathe for a span. I would have called a count of 5 if numbers had been welcome. Then I laughed once, stupid and painful, because of course my name was in the drowned church's catalog of lost and found. Of course there was an hour waiting for me somewhere under this water. Of course the past had been doing me the discourtesy of being organized. I looked back toward shore. The marina lights were blades of yellow behind the black line of elms. A truck hissed past on the highway with the loneliness particular to 1 a.m. I looked into the water. It gleamed the way eyes gleam in the dark when they tilt and catch you. The book waited, patient as a basket. "All right," I said to no one with a mouth. "All right, show me where you keep it." The lake offered me an answer the way certain people offer advice, not with a word, but by removing an obstacle. The 6th step cleared. Water slid off it in a single skin and lay down farther away. The 7th step gave up its stubbornness reluctantly. The 8th showed itself. I looked down my own throat. "Yes," said my knees. "No," said the safer parts of fear. I took the 1st step. The stone pressed me back into my feet. The 2nd, the 3rd. On the fourth, I said my father's name and did not apologize. On the fifth, the book in my hand throbbed once, as if remembering it had a pulse. I went down until the water touched my shins, then my knees, then the hem of my shorts. I went down until the lake reached my waist and reminded me that even in August a reservoir isn't interested in human comfort. I went down until my breath made clamps of my ribs, until the dark mast at the edges of vision said this is where bodies stop behaving. The steps kept being there. The water kept not pushing me back. Below me, something glowed faintly. Not a will-o'-the-wisp trick, not green like algae. Warm, gold as a candle in a jar. The light pooled in a rectangle the size of an open book. I reached with my toes, found the next step, lowered myself another 6 inches. Whatever hand of reason I had brought with me grabbed my ear and begged me to go back. I ignored it the way you ignore a doorbell when you already know who it is. My fingertips found the glow. It wasn't a thing, it was thicker than that. It was a texture in water. Imagine warmth braided with time until both learn a third shape. I cupped it the way you cup minnows. It held. It stung the inside of my wrists the way cold metal does in January, except opposite. The book in my other hand grew heavier, dragging down as if to balance. I lifted what I'd caught into the air. It burned without fire. It dripped without wet. It had the weight of a pocket watch and the lightness of a moth's wing. In its middle a tiny hand moved, not ticking, gliding. When the hand marked the top, it hesitated in a way that made my throat tighten, and then the hesitation shifted into a sound. A bell, very small and very resolute, rang somewhere far above the lake. I looked up in time to see a shape walk out onto the causeway and pause at the posts. The shape did not consider the stones or the eggshell slick of algae or the fact of drowning. It looked at me as if I had taken too long. The book in my hand turned its own page. The script wrote itself with no pen. Received. Thorn reclaimed 1 hour. 1 at the steps, late evening. Witnessed. The shape at the posts lifted its head, the way you do when you smell something you missed the first time. Then it began to descend the steps with the steadiness of someone who had rehearsed for years. Water accepted it without fuss. It didn't ripple around the knees of the figure. It parted like someone moving through a crowd of people who loved them. I said the first wild thing that occurred to me. Who are you? The shape's face came into the moonlight where the steps had given it a place to stand. She was my mother at 30. Not the mother who taught me to throw stones flat enough to skip past a pier. Not the mother who fought morphine without grace and called me by my father's name because it hurt too much to remember the right one. The mother who had paused on the school gym floor at a winter carnival and laughed with her teeth over the rim of a paper cup of weak punch. The one from a photograph my aunt kept in a box with a rubber band because it made the room meaner whenever it looked out. In the photograph, there was a woman standing behind her, a friend whose name had turned to powder. In the water, there was no one behind her. "You're late," she said. Her voice was exactly the weight of a winter coat after you come in, and it's still holding the cold. "You've been dead 10 years, I said, because grief only ever learns one sentence and keeps practicing it until it's tired of everyone else's face. "Return," she said, and nodded at the post as if I needed a translation. I held up the hour in my hand. "They were keeping this for me," I said. "I think they kept others." "Of course they did," she said. "You asked them too." "I didn't." "You did," she said. "You were 7 and you left your blue marble on the sill in the choir loft. You cried for it for 3 days. Then you got fed up and wrote a note to God. You folded it into a hymn book with a Band-Aid. You asked for every hour you would waste on wanting what you could not have to be kept here until you had the sense to use them in one good piece. I stood with the hour spilling through my fingers like warm mercury and thought about a small me furious enough to bargain with the building. I thought about every morning since the diagnosis when I had woken and stared at the ceiling and spent time like a rich idiot making a fire out of a roll of notes. I don't know how, I said, to spend it right. She reached to my wrist. The lake touched her up to the elbow and didn't get to be proud about it. Her fingers were warm and calloused, where scissors had rubbed for years. You use it where it hurts to wish for more, she said. You spend it where you stopped. And then what? My throat had pins in it. Then you go, she said, very gently. I can't, I began, but she shook her head as if I were telling the story out of order, and in that instant the causeway behind her trembled. A line of lanterns walked out across the stones, not hanging from posts, moving, each one the size of a fist, bright as a swallowed sun, bobbing at waist height. They spaced themselves at even intervals from the gate back toward shore. When the last reached the gravel behind the marina, they stopped and waited like patient dogs. You invited them, my mother said. When the word is on a stone and in a mouth it gets brave. What word? Return, she said again, and the lanterns hummed once, like an organ making its throat clear in a chapel at dusk. I looked down. The hour in my hands looked back. Is this all of it? I asked. Is this the hour? Will there be more? You put away more than anyone else in this valley, she said. She looked up and away for a beat with that expression she had when counting something difficult in her head, and finding the number even worse than she expected. You should be ashamed, my love, and then you should be glad. Glad about what? That you get to choose where it goes, she said. Glad that you didn't have to wait until you were a wall to come for it. She lifted my hands with hers, holding them under the little warmth as if to show the lake she trusted me. You get to do it while your heart is a room that still surprises you. The wind changed. No temperature in it, just a shift in the way the night kept its manners. Behind my mother, something darker than the lake rolled past. I heard heels on stone behind me and turned. My aunt stood at the gateposts in her gardening boots, skirt muddy to the knee. She had been dead 2 summers longer than my mother. She raised one hand and waved once, unsentimental. From the shore, a man's voice called a name. Not mine. A different summer, held at attention for an instant, complaining about the tension, presently dismissed. The book in my hand wrote another line. Witness, mother, aunt, 2 others who refused names. Come up, my mother said. You're cold. I said again, and the word couldn't decide if it wanted to be fine or empty. You don't get to say you can't every time, she said. You asked for this when you were 7. Don't be rude to children. The hour burned once in my hands and understood me better than I did. I climbed the steps with the awkwardness of a dream, trying not to lose track of its narrative. At the 3rd step from the top, I slipped just enough to make my stomach jump, and my mother's hand closed around my elbow. She weighed more than the water and less than the field behind the old school. She held as long as she absolutely had to, and let go as soon as I remembered to keep my balance. At the posts she stopped. The lanterns waited, evenly spaced and polite. The marina lights did not argue. My mother looked at the book, at the page that had filled with today's date and my name, and the word received, and smiled in a way that made my jaw ache with how hard my face tried to be something vessels can't be. For what? I asked. For who? Where do I take it? You already know, she said. I don't, I said. You do, she said. The hour in my palm buzzed once. In my head there was a room, a blue plastic chair with a crack in the seat, an ivy pole with tape gummy from too many restarts, a window that faced west exactly enough that evening could be a moral argument. I had been standing outside that room for 9 months, watching the door, counting ceiling tiles, speaking like a tour guide to friends who didn't know they had enlisted. I had not gone in during the parts that were going to take me apart. I had pretended the nurse's shift change was a law, that time belonged to fluorescent bulbs, that I could tidy grief like a countertop. I can't give it to the past, I said. which was smart and stupid at the same time. You don't need to, she said. It will find where it goes. You keep it in your hands and take your hands where they should have been. Is it? I swallowed. Is it my hour or hers? Both, she said, and before I could try to make that sentence any less impossible, she leaned forward and kissed my face exactly where she had kissed me every first day of school, quick and unceremonious, as if love were a chore and the chore got done. Go. When she stepped back, the lake did not take her. She walked away along the stones. The lanterns blew out one by one behind her, like breath-extinguishing candles on a cake you would never admit out loud you wanted. When she reached the marina, she did not turn. She walked on. I held an hour in my hands that warmed my skin without burning. The book closed itself and lay down in the shallow like it had always been there. The steps behind me filled in with water to the knee, then to the waist, then to the chest I was no longer in. By the time I reached my car, the moon had remembered to be shy again. My hands shook on the steering wheel. The hour sat on the passenger seat and made the night mode display glow warmer. I drove the 15 minutes to the hospital with the windows down because the world needed to tell me it still had air. The security guard at the front desk had a crossword folded into the sports section. He didn't look up. The elevator was slow in protest. The corridor on the third floor smelled like lemon, bleach, stale toast. I walked past the nurse's station and 3 doors too many. I stood outside 318 until the hour in my hand buzzed like a bee. I went in and the hour unfolded. It was not long, it was not short, it was exact, it fit. When it finished, it did not leave. It slid into the corners of the room like light. It laid itself into the folds of the sheet. It settled on the good hand. It learned the sound of her breath. It taught me the sound of mine when it isn't trying to be a wall. When she slept, I took what was left of it back to the lake. The lanterns were gone. The causeway had resumed keeping its privacy. The book waited on the 6th step, just where I had found it, as if there were no middle to stories. I bent and let the hour I had not spent drip back into the water. The book wrote, returned, part of Thorn's hour, when, remainder banked. The page shivered like a dog shaking river from its coat. I set the book where it wouldn't slide. The wind said a summer thing to the reeds. A frog that wasn't brave lied about its size. Behind me, on the gravel, an engine coughed. I turned to see a truck with its dome light on, a man with a thermos, a woman with a paper bag, both in yellow vests. Damn authority, night crew. He lifted a hand. I lifted mine. We were people on different errands. The reservoir made its case about being a lake. The posts at the gate didn't need to teach me the word again. On the walk back to the car, my phone buzzed without reception. The screen lit with a time that didn't try to trick me. I felt the hours sitting somewhere my body couldn't designate, and knew for the first time since the diagnosis that I had enough, not forever, enough. The next night, the water took back 2 steps. The third night, 3. By the end of the week, the causeway was a rumor again. The historical sign at the marina grew smug. The town pretended superstition was seasonal. The lanterns went wherever lanterns go to rehearse. I slept. When I woke, there was mud on my shoes and the taste of metal in my mouth, and a page of a hymn stuck to my palm like skin. It came off under the tap. It left a stinging absence. I wrote the word on the mirror above my sink in the steam of my breath because habit matters. Return. I didn't need the gate every time. Some nights the hour hummed in my bedside table, patient. Some nights it lived in the space between a breath and a machine. Weeks later, when the dam let the water climb and drown the stones for proper, I went down to the marina alone at 2 in the morning and stood where the line between not doing and doing lives. I said nothing polite. The lake murmured things none of us know how to write down. Under the surface, the book turned a page without help. The next hand on the gateposts would not be mine. The valley remembers everyone eventually. That's just how water keeps its books. I did not wait for the causeway again until winter, when the reservoir froze in a lace no one wanted to risk a skate on. By then, my hands had learned exactly how warm an hour is, and how heavy, and where to lay it when you're finished, so it will be easy for the next person to say the word out loud without bleeding. The first time I said it for someone else, I didn't need the steps. I needed a chair, a bad window, and the patience to be there when the bell rang. Not high, not bright, but resolute, somewhere above the lake inside a throat. The weeks after the thaw blurred in the way seasons do, when you stop asking them to explain themselves. The hospital visits slowed. The roads grew soft with mud. By April, the town's gossip had circled back to its usual orbit. Who had salted whose garden? Who was late on the mortgage? Whether the summer festival would include fireworks this year. Nobody mentioned the lake except to say the fish were biting shallow. Nobody mentioned that I walked down to the marina most nights, even when the causeway was hidden, even when the water lay flat and smug against the retaining wall. I carried the memory of the book in my chest like a bruise. It ached when I bent wrong. Sometimes I swore I felt it pulse. The part of the hour I had returned hummed faintly beneath the reservoir, waiting, a battery no dam could borrow. I wondered who else had made bargains as children, who else had written notes to gods with gum-stuck hymnals for delivery. The valley had a way of banking everything, but not all withdrawals were mine. One night in May, when the frogs sang so hard it felt like the ditch banks might split, I found the girl again. She was sitting on the rail by the boat launch, shoes swinging above the dark. I knew her by her hair, pale as milk in moonlight, and by the fact that she didn't startle when I approached. She looked like she had been waiting, though her eyes stayed fixed on the water. "You kept it," she said. "Returned part of it," I corrected. "That's the same thing." Her voice was flat, the kind of flat that comes from years of answering questions that never change. I stood beside her, both of us staring at the skin of the lake. "Who are you?" I asked. She shrugged. "The one who didn't go back. They ask me too. They always ask." I said no. The air thickened. The frogs faltered, then picked up again, stubborn. "And now?" I asked. Her smile was sharp. "Now I wait for the others. Someone has to warn them." I thought of my mother on the steps, the lanterns, the word carved in stone. I thought of the book writing names into itself without hands. "They'll keep asking," I said. "Of course they will," she said. "That's what return means." We sat in silence for a while. The water lapped politely against the ramp. Somewhere across the lake, a coyote yipped and was answered twice. When I looked back at the girl, she was gone. Only the dent on the rail where her weight had been remained, and even that smoothed as the wind shifted. I drove home, but I didn't sleep. The hour inside me hummed louder, restless. The next morning, I found the words scratched into the condensation on my bathroom mirror again. Return, even though I hadn't touched the glass. The valley was reminding me it never keeps just one promise. By June, the dam authority declared the reservoir healthy, a word that made people cheerful at barbecues and suspicious at town meetings. The level rose and held. The causeway stayed hidden, but the book did not forget me just because the water pretended it was a mirror. Some nights, lying on my back in heat that wouldn't settle, I felt a small weight form on my chest, a warmth the size of a pocket watch. If I closed my hand over it, it became a thing I could carry until morning. If I sat up and looked, there would be nothing visible at all. The hour behaved like good music, insistently present and impossible to prove to anyone who needed it explained. Word traveled without words. Nobody asked me outright what I was doing at the marina after midnight. No one asked about the hours. The town has a way of letting stories walk the back roads until they get where they were already going. Still, people began to show up where I was. A woman in scrubs I recognized from the hospital brought me a coffee at 2 in the morning and didn't look surprised when I wasn't surprised to see her. A man who ran the bait shop stood beside me one night and said his father had fished the old river before it became a lake, and sometimes his father still did. Once Mrs. Devlin, the same Mrs. Devlin from the drowned ledger, now almost 90, shuffled down the path with her granddaughter and said, "Pish, you're taking too long. Let the water do its work and stop hovering." The first person who asked out loud was a boy, 15, maybe 16, wide shoulders. He hadn't decided whether to keep. He approached like a deer that had chosen to trust someone for 1 minute and wanted to shame them into deserving it. He didn't say hello. He stood on the ramp and stared at the lake and said he couldn't remember his mother's face. The photographs were wrong, he said. They were sharp where they shouldn't be. They made her look like someone other people knew. He wanted the everyday face, the one that had told him to rinse his bowl and not to slouch. He wanted the face that had looked at him while she folded towels. He wanted the look that asked who he was becoming and forgave him in advance, whether or not he became it. There are hours and there are hours. Some are gathered by a church that kept better books than heaven. Some are made by the body remembering to be a room for more than one person at a time. I thought of telling him that. Instead, I put my hand on the rail and asked him what he had brought to trade. He looked at me like I'd asked him for money he didn't have. His eyes narrowed, and that was when I liked him. He said he had a summer he didn't need. The summer after she died. Every minute of it. He hadn't used any of it right. It had burned to ash, and ash isn't nothing, but it wasn't the kind of something he wanted. He offered it. He wanted an hour back. He would put down a season in exchange for 60 exact minutes of his real life. I told him this wasn't a store. He said he knew. He told the lake instead. He said her name. He said it clear and careless, the way some names are meant to be used. He said it again and slower, like practicing a blessing. The water pulled in as if holding its breath. Something warm and weighty lifted in my palm. I didn't show it to him. That's not how it works. I asked him whether he had a place ready. He nodded. The kitchen, he said. His father's house, the one that never got fully clean again. The kitchen where the towels were folded wrong now. Always, forever. He wanted the hour there. We drove with the windows down. He grew talkative the way people do when they are trying to keep a promise and don't want to look back. He told me his mother used to collect menus from diners that closed. He said she kept them in a drawer, as if you could still order from any of them if you were polite to the night. He said he had dreams with the smell of hot grease, even though the kitchen never did greasy food. I said nothing important, because there is nothing to say before a bell. In the kitchen, the clock over the stove said 8:19, even though it was near 3 in the morning, which is the kind of humor appliances have, when grief makes them icons. The boy stood at the counter with his hands braced on the laminate. I stood beside him with my heart trying to climb out of my throat. The hour was a hum in my palm. No light, no trick, just insistence. I asked him if he was ready, and he closed his eyes and said yes. Okay, I'll pay attention. It opened like a door you didn't know was in a wall. No sound loud enough to frighten the dog asleep under the table. No light to draw neighbors or moths. It was the kind of happening the house would pretend not to know about later. The air warmed. The smell of sun on laundry crept in like a joke. Then the shape of a woman was there, not ghostly, not luminous, just there, stepping into the kitchen with a towel over one shoulder and a stack of folded pillowcases in her arms. She glanced at the boy the way mothers glance, taking in all of him with a single look and finding him intact and deciding to let that be enough for now. She set the pillowcases down and told him not to slouch. He straightened, shoulders shocked into adolescence all over again. Then she laughed under her breath because she had caught herself saying it, and she used to tease herself about sounding like her own mother. She reached for a glass in the cupboard without looking, and found it because the house remembered her even when the people didn't. She poured water from the tap. She leaned on the counter. She asked him whether the summer was doing what summers are meant to. He said a lie, because the truth would have detonated all of it. She squinted at him and decided to let it pass. It lasted exactly as long as a good story that refuses to be embellished. She adjusted the kitchen towel on her shoulder and looked at the clock and frowned because it lied. She rinsed the glass and put it back and said, "Rinse your bowl," and then she was gone. Not vanishing, not smoke, not a trick. The room resumed being only a room, and the boy resumed being only a boy who stood in it with his hands braced on the laminate, except now his mouth knew how to curve at one corner, a way it hadn't known for a year. The dog under the table woke and thumped its tail twice. The boy rinsed a bowl that wasn't there and dried his eyes with the back of his hand and went out to the porch alone and didn't sit. I stayed in the kitchen because the hour still hummed faintly and had to be ended properly. I let it drip what remained onto the cool of the sink and heard a bell far off in water. After that, the town stopped pretending it wasn't watching. The bait shop man came with his hands shaking and asked for an hour to fix the way he had said goodbye to his brother through a window during the year of the strict hospital rules. Mrs. Devlin's granddaughter stood by the ramp one evening and asked for something smaller than an hour. 10 minutes, she said. Just 10. She wanted to stand in front of a painting she had walked past in a museum the month before her boy was born, and she wanted to fall apart at the colors. We took the hour apart and made minutes of it, and though the lake understood, the book wrote a note in the margin about new math and reminded us, gently but firmly, that interest only accrues on what you return. It was not all tender. A man from the dam showed up one night in a county SUV and told me I was trespassing. He said the drawdown schedule was posted and I had no business on department land after 10. He said people drown easy when they don't watch their feet. He didn't say the thing he was frightened of, that the lake kept 2 sets of books and neither set was his. We stood by the sign with the black and white photograph of the valley. The cows looked at us the way cows look at everything. He said I lost my boy in there and lifted his chin at the water. I said I know, which was impolite and true. He looked away and chewed his lip and folded his arms. He was the kind of man whose belt already knew the shape of a pistol. He didn't wear one out of courtesy or defiance or both. He said, "Does it work the same for everybody?" I said no. He nodded as if that was kinder than yes. He came back 2 nights later wearing plain clothes. He asked for an hour to sit in the truck with the dome light on and listen to his son explain a kind of math with a patience that turned the cab into a chapel. The hour did what it could. After, he put both hands on the steering wheel and stared at his knuckles and said damn, and then thank you to the dashboard. The girl kept appearing and vanishing in the way weather does when you imagine a line through it. Sometimes she sat on the boat ramp rail with her ankles crossed like a ballet student rubbing blisters. Once she stood on the marina's roof, hair blowing out straight, as if the wind had claimed her weight and would not return it. She didn't talk much. When she did, it was always to warn. Don't promise them what you don't have. Don't spend from your neighbor's jar. Don't front the lake on interest. It hears if you tell it you'll bring more later. It remembers if you don't. It takes the difference in something you don't think you have to give, and you're wrong about what that is. I started to keep a notebook, even though the book under the lake wrote its own. I wrote with a pen that skipped when it felt dishonest. I wrote names and requests and what we used. I kept track of return. I made sure to put back more than we took. Some nights I came home with my palm warm and trembling from what I'd held, and the mirror would have the word on it again in my breath, return, and I would laugh just to prove I was not reverent yet. I saw my mother only once more. It was not for me. The boy came back that August with another request and another trade. I told him it was not an arcade, and he rolled his eyes and said obviously, which felt like growth. He wanted to watch his mother fold towels again, but this time he wanted to be of use. He wanted her to tell him where the linen closet was because he had lived in the house 2 years since and hadn't looked. He wanted to carry the towels and put them on the shelf and have her say yes. That's right, like a metronome. The hour could be unextravagant. The lake humored both of us. He carried towels. She said, there, middle shelf, not too tight, we're not making bricks. She smiled and bit her lip because the towel fluff stuck to it. He put his fingers on the towel, and she touched his shoulder, and the moment did a small work on the way his spine held him. He cried after. He pretended it was sweat because the kitchen was hot, and then he stopped pretending and it was fine. There were refusals. A woman asked for a year, and I told her, that's not an hour. She insisted that if you stacked enough hours, they would be a year in disguise. I told her the lake did not do disguises. She sat on the ramp and sobbed and cursed my name and the waters and the churches and gods and the dams. I told her to keep the cursing. It would circulate the air. She laughed too hard, and it became weeping again. And then the wind picked up and the frogs stopped, and a bell rang from nowhere, polite, and the lanterns remembered steps that had not surfaced. I listened for whether I was being corrected. The water stayed flat. We gave her 10 minutes instead, the sound of her sister's voice in the front seat of a car, while both their husbands were inside a grocery store, telling the same joke to different clerks. When it finished, she said that was not what she had wanted, and then she said, oh, and then her face changed in a way that made me step back a little to make room for afterward. The second drawdown came late that year, in September, when the town had already taken down the festival bunting and was pretending pumpkins grew themselves in pies. The water peeled back faster than past summers. The dam authority apologized in the paper, and the paper enjoyed reporting it. The causeway surfaced in 2 days and kept going. The posts at the gate leaned in further. The word return looked newly carved again, as if someone had taken a chisel to the stone just to keep the edges honest. The steps revealed themselves all the way down to a level I hadn't seen. The little plaza at the base grew wider. The wall of the church's nave showed in ribs. People came in daylight with cameras. I came at night with nothing. The book lay on the 6th step where it always did, unbothered by the short-sightedness of weather. I opened it. The script was my mother's that night. The entries were neat, tilted, funny in the margin, where she'd argued with herself about spelling. I ran my finger under a line that read found. Patience for the second drawer from the left. Holder uncertain. Ask around. In the margin, someone had added in my aunt's block letters. Mine, you thieves. Next to that, a scrawl not either of theirs. We share in this house, or we sleep in the yard. Behind me, the girl said, don't. I turned. She stood at the edge of the plaza, feet bare, toes curled against the slick of algae, as if daring the lake to push her. She shook her head. The lanterns bloomed out from the shore on instinct and stopped halfway like a throat, remembering not to swallow. I realized then what had changed. She wasn't warning me. She was warning the town, not with words, with presence. Someone else had come with ears tuned to wrong. They arrived at midnight in quiet cars, 1 county SUV, 2 trucks, a sedan with a rusted door, flashlights held at shoulder height, the way people hold guns. The bait shop man was with them, which hurt more. The one in front said there had been talk. He said there had been hours handed out to people who hadn't paid for them, and if the book was writing itself, I had better hand it over. He said if there was a system, it needed a committee. He said town business is not for the lake to keep. I stood on the 6th step with the book open and the hours humming under the skin of the reservoir, and my mother's handwriting making the page look like a room with an open window. I said nothing for long enough that the leader thought he'd won. He kneeled at the edge of the plaza and reached as if the book were a turtle he meant to turn on its back. The girl stepped forward, put her bare foot on his forearm, and bent down until her face was near his. She did not say a word. He drew his arm back like he'd put it into nettles. He stood, embarrassed at being seen, angrier for being embarrassed. He told me the town could charge for tours. He said people drove upstate to see stranger things than this. He said there was no reason we should not turn memory into revenue. Behind him, the others nodded the way people nod when they want their friend to stop talking, before he says the thing that will make them not friends. The bait shop man stared at the water. He said nothing, which was either betrayal or help. I decided to wait to decide. I told the leader he couldn't make the book do anything it didn't want to do. I told him he could carry it if he could lift it. He bent again, bracing himself, and I stepped out of the way because there are lessons you can't learn with words. He put his hands under the book and did what men do when they want to show other men they are not afraid of lifting. The book turned a page on his fingers and wrote found, pride, damp, return to owner. The men behind him laughed once despite themselves. He flushed. He reached harder. The book weighed a valley. He could not move it. He stood and told me to leave. He told me this was county property. He said he would call the state. I said, call the lake. He did not laugh. He leaned down one last time and tried to slide the book sideways, and it slid an inch, and the hour in my hand flared, and a bell rang. Not the small bell I knew, not the resolute bell of the church, but something deeper, hung lower, a bell that had rung when the river was a river, and men pulled fish out by hand. The water rose up quick and slapped his fingers like a mother scolding. He leapt back. The men behind him took a step, because bodies learn from what water says, even when minds argue. The bait shop man finally spoke. He said we go home. He said we stop. He said the town had never gotten rich from doing the wrong thing, and that would be a poor time to start. He said the dam authority would cut the overflow in the morning. He said please. The leader looked around at the men who had come to feel large and saw in their faces the smallness waiting. If they left, he said nothing. He left. The trucks rolled away. The sedan doors squealed. The SUV's dome light made a last small circle of man-made day on the lace of gnats. The girl watched them go and then sat on the wet stones and put her head in her hands. I asked if I should thank her, and she said, don't be stupid. I do this so I can sleep. We returned more than we took after that. People came with offerings first. A summer they had burned, a morning they had wasted learning to be angry, a cigarette on a porch step that had tasted good at the time and had cost a decade. The lake took it all without ceremony, like a clerk with a right temper. It gave back what it could. It kept the rest until the keeper learned. By October, the water climbed again. The causeway went under like someone who knows how to swim. The book sank into its place as neatly as it had risen. The word on the gatepost stayed, of course. The girl stopped coming, and I stopped looking for her. The damn man sat with me once by the sign with the cows and told me he had thought about the hour every day and had not asked for another because he was trying not to be greedy. I told him greed is not the kind of wanting the lake mines. He said, what kind is? And I said, the kind that asks to be bigger for love. The first frost came. The hospital heat clanked on with a sound like old radiators in schooner holes. The holiday banners went up in town, and the hardware store sold strings of bulbs, with a discount if you promised to require no instructions. On a night when the air was thin enough to cut, and the stars made a noise you could almost hear, the hour arrived in my hand without my asking, warm and ready, and a little insistent. I knew where it belonged. I took it to the chair by the west window on the third floor, and I held it there until the machine understood, and the breathing did what breathing does when a hand holds it right. After, There was a thin place in the air by the sill where a song had been kept too long in the cold and had thawed and decided to stay. I put my palm against it and felt a bell I had not rung. The lake froze early. The reservoir lay in a sheet with seams like brain lines. The paper printed a picture and called it beautiful. People stood with coffee at the marina and spoke about thickness like weathermen. I kept my feet on shore. I do not skate. I am not a person who trusts anything that pretends to be solid because winter asked it to. But I went down at night and put my hand on the ice and said the word, not loud, not prayerful, just correct. The ice hummed. Under it, the book turned a page to make room. Above it, the night listened and returned the favor. Winter deepened until the lake looked less like water and more like a great plate. The valley had set out for the stars. The ice stayed, silver gray, with fractures that spidered but never failed. Children skated on the shallow coves in daylight, their shouts carrying far, their parents stamping their feet on shore and saying things like, "Don't go too far out. The middle's not safe." They were wrong. The middle was the safest place of all. It was the edges that lied. I kept going at night. The habit was carved now. Midnight, sometimes 1, sometimes 3, when the world had forgotten its noise. I would stand on the shore or kneel on the ramp, hand flat on the ice, waiting for the hum. It never failed me. The book under there drowned. Faithful always turned, always made room. The ice felt warm to my palm when the hour rose. Some nights it gave nothing more. No request, no voice, just warmth, a reminder that the keeping continued. But other nights, I was not alone. The girl returned first. One cold dusk, with fog low to the water, I saw her walking across the frozen surface, as though it had been waiting for her. Barefoot, of course, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her dress too thin for weather. I watched, heartsick at the sight, expecting cracks to chase her like knives, but the ice welcomed her, flexing beneath her feet, carrying her weight like memory carries a name. She stopped 50 paces from me, turned her head, and looked over her shoulder. "Not yours tonight," she said. I frowned, confused. "Whose then?" She smiled faintly. "Mine." She knelt on the ice, pressed her palms down, and for the first time I saw someone else draw an hour. It lifted from the dark as if reluctant to leave her. She cupped it close, cradling it like a flame in a storm. Then she stood, turned away from me, and walked toward the center of the reservoir. The fog swallowed her whole. The next evening, at the diner, the waitress with the tired eyes mentioned that her grandmother had died in her sleep, peaceful, without struggle, with the sound of a hymn in her throat. She said it like a gift she hadn't expected. I said nothing. I stirred my coffee until it was cold. The girl had not lied. She had claimed her own hour and spent it elsewhere. I wondered how many she had kept in reserve. Weeks later, I met the bait shop man again. He had grown gaunt, the way grief makes men taller and thinner and less steady. He asked me straight, "Do you remember when my brother fell through the ice on Two Bend, back before the dam?" "I wasn't born," I said. "But you know it," he pressed. "Yes, his jaw worked. They never found him. They said the current took him, but the current shouldn't have run there." He licked his lips, eyes wet. "Can you?" I didn't let him finish. "No." His face broke, old leather folding in on itself. "Why not?" "Because he didn't leave an hour here," I said. "The lake can only return what it holds. You can't ask it for the impossible." He swore under his breath, spat on the snow, and turned away. But the next night, he came back. He didn't ask again. Instead, he offered, out loud, deliberate, a morning he had wasted 40 years ago, fishing alone while his wife had cried herself empty in their kitchen. He said he had wanted silence more than he had wanted her voice. He had wanted the river more than her eyes. He regretted it every day since. He wanted to give it back. The ice cracked beneath us. Not breaking, but speaking. The hum rose, louder than I'd ever heard it. An hour surfaced. Not bright, not golden, gray, like fog bottled in a sphere. He didn't take it. He left it with me. You'll know where it belongs, he said, and trudged away, boots crunching until the night swallowed him. I carried it for days, the gray hour, heavy as lead in my pocket. It didn't hum like the others. It pulsed, slow, reluctant. Finally, one night, I dreamed of the drowned valley, the old schoolhouse window, faces pressed against glass, one face clearer than the rest. A boy's, eyes wide, mouth open, bubbles rising from his lips. I woke with the taste of river water in my throat, and I knew. I walked to the frozen reservoir before dawn. I set the gray hour on the ice and whispered the name the bait shop man had never spoken. The hour cracked like an egg, mist seeped down through the fractures, and for a heartbeat I saw the shape of a boy, thin, soaked, hair plastered but smiling, before it was gone, folded back into the book. The ice healed, seamless. The gray hour was no more. That morning, the bait shop man didn't open his store. By noon, word spread through town. He had died in his chair, eyes closed, mouth soft, as if he had been listening to a story no one else could hear. The book had accepted his trade. The ice lasted until March. By then, I had stopped pretending the hours were miracles. They were transactions, ancient and honest. The valley kept its promises. The people had to learn to keep theirs. But promises, like ice, don't always hold. Spring thaw came like a confession, sudden, messy, impossible to ignore. The ice softened first, at the edges, where the reeds whispered, then broke in plates that clattered against one another like crockery in a sink. By the second week of March, the lake was free again, black and wide, reflecting a sky the color of pewter. The causeway stayed hidden, but the hume returned, louder now, as if the book under there had grown restless through the long winter. The hours surfaced more often. I didn't always ask for them. Sometimes they pressed into my palm unbidden, hot and insistent. The girl reappeared at odd intervals, her hair always wet, her eyes always rimmed red, like she hadn't slept. She stopped warning me in words. Instead, she watched, silent, as if tallying what I kept and what I returned. The first demand came with the crocus bloom. Mrs. Devlin, who had laughed off her 90 years as if they were a practical joke, knocked on my door one morning with a face that had forgotten humor. Her granddaughter stood behind her, pale. "They're asking," Mrs. Devlin said, voice sharp as it must have been when she was young. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew, the ones beneath. "They're asking for the hour I took back when I was a girl." She clutched her shawl tight. "They say it's due." I let them inside, poured tea, though none of us drank it. "Tell me exactly," I said. Her granddaughter answered instead. "She hears them in the walls. They say she owes. That return means return." Mrs. Devlin's hand shook. I thought I'd paid. All these years, I thought. Her voice cracked. The hum rose in my own chest then, unignorable, like a second heartbeat. The book was speaking, through her, through me. Return. That night I went to the lake. The girl waited on the ramp. "It begins," she said flatly. "What does?" The ledger balancing. The water parted at the steps, though no wind moved it. The book surfaced, dripping. It opened itself, pages fluttering. Mrs. Devlin's name gleamed on one line, underlined twice. Next to it, borrowed. 1 hour, 1932. Not returned. I touched the ink. It pulsed. The air grew bitter. The girl whispered, "They don't forget. Not ever." The next day, Mrs. Devlin collapsed in her kitchen. They said her heart had given out. But I knew better. The book had claimed its due. After that, more came. The nurse with the tired eyes, the man from the county office, even children, pale and sleepless. muttering about voices in the dark. The book wanted balance. It had been patient for decades, but patience has a limit. And always it came to me, in my dreams, in my waking hours, in the hum that grew unbearable in my ribs. Return, it said, return. The girl met me again on the causeway when the water sank low enough to show the posts. She looked thinner, her dress clinging as though always damp. You can't keep doing this, she said. I'm not keeping anything, I snapped. I give them back, I've returned everything. Her eyes burned. Not yours. The hum in my chest flared, searing. I staggered, clutching at the stone post with its carved word. The girl leaned close, whispering in my ear. You asked once when you were small. You wrote the note. You banked more than hours. You banked years. And now the book wants them. The water below boiled. Pages turned themselves. My name filled a line. Next due, 3 years. I fell to my knees. The girl touched my shoulder. Not unkind, but with no pity. This is what it means, she said. The house keeps. The valley remembers. The book only waits. I lifted my head. What happens if I refuse? Her mouth curved in a smile, too thin to be kind. Then it writes you as lost. Behind her, the water shivered. Lanterns bloomed along the causeway, one by one, stretching toward the black horizon, and I understood, with a dread that hollowed me out. The book was done giving. It was ready to collect. The night after the ledger showed me what I owed, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt like the valley shifting closer. The word return seemed etched in the walls themselves. At dawn I drove, though I didn't know where. Fields lay raw, thawed mud, breathing the last of winter. The road climbed the ridge overlooking the reservoir, and I pulled over because I needed to see it from above, as if distance might turn it small. From there, the water didn't look like a lake at all. It looked like an eye, dark and bottomless, with the causeway its buried vein. I remembered being 7, folding that note into a hymnal. I remembered how furious I had been that summer. The marble lost, my father gone for days, my mother brittle with grief she wouldn't name. I had wanted someone to keep my anger, my loneliness, my wasted wanting, until I could do better with it. A child's wish, stupid and sharp. The valley had answered. 3 years, the book had written. Not minutes, not hours. Years. By afternoon, I forced myself back to the marina. The girl was there, crouched by the water, tracing lines in the mud. She didn't look up when I approached. You've been thinking about refusing, she said. Yes, her hand stilled. And you know what happens. I swallowed. It writes me as lost. She nodded. The lost aren't gone. They're kept, like specimens, faces pressed against glass, staring out forever. The hum in my chest deepened, spreading through my limbs. The lake was listening. Then how do I bargain? I asked. How do I make it take less? Now she looked at me, and her eyes glistened, as if she'd been waiting to hear the question. You can give it something else. Not hours, not years, something harder. What? Her mouth twisted. Memory. The book values memory more than time. Time is cheap, but memory feeds it. A chill crawled my spine. Whose memory? Yours, she whispered. The water rippled, though no wind moved. The book's hum became a pulse beneath us both. I thought of my mother, her towel slung on her shoulder, her brief laugh. I thought of the boy folding towels, of the bait shop man hearing his brother's voice one last time. What if I gave that up? What if I traded my memories to keep my years? Would I survive myself? The girl rose to her feet, mud streaking her calves. Choose soon, she said. It doesn't wait long once it writes the debt. She walked into the fog and was gone. That night, I dreamed I stood on the causeway, the lanterns burning all the way to the horizon. Each lantern held a face. Some I knew, some I didn't. They all stared, patient, waiting. When I looked down, the book was in my hands, blank and heavy, its pages breathing. And then a bell tolled, deeper than the valley, and I woke with my mouth full of lake water. The bell still rang in my bones the next night when I walked the causeway. The water had sunk again, exposing the plaza, the steps, the posts leaning inward like judges conferring. The book lay waiting on the sixth step, open to the page with my name. The ink glowed faint as embers. NX due, 3 years. The word return pulsed beneath it, each stroke like a heartbeat not my own. The girl stood by the posts, arms folded, her eyes hollow with sleeplessness. It won't wait any longer, she said. I crouched by the book. My reflection in the water looked back, older, thinner, with a face I barely recognized. 3 years, I whispered. The water shivered in agreement. I pressed my palms flat against the stone. Take something else. Take the weight I've carried. Take the sleepless nights, the guilt. Leave me whole. The book fluttered its pages, unimpressed. The ink sharpened. Years, it insisted. The girl's voice was low. It doesn't want your pain. It wants what's clean, what's whole, what makes you you. My chest ached with the hum. The choice pressed closer. Time or memory, life or self. I thought of my mother's laugh, quick and bright. I thought of the boy rinsing a bowl that wasn't there. I thought of the bait shop man, gray hour pulsing in my hand. If I lost those memories, I would still be alive, but I wouldn't know why. If I gave years, I would keep the meaning, but lose the time to use it. The book waited. The lanterns bloomed across the causeway, one by one, patient, merciless. I spoke aloud, though my voice shook. I returned the years. The ink pulsed once, satisfied. The hum flared, searing my ribs, my throat, my skull. I collapsed to my knees as heat poured out of me, torn away like breath. Images flared behind my eyes, seasons unwinding, futures I would never live, a morning sun I would not see, a conversation I would never finish, the taste of bread I would never eat. They left me, 3 years peeled from the map of my life, sunk into the water. When it ended, I was shaking, my breath ragged. The book closed itself with a heavy clap. The ink faded to a note. Debt paid. The lanterns winked out, one by one, until only the dark remained. The girl crouched beside me. Her hand brushed my shoulder, light as a moth. You chose well, she murmured. I laughed once, broken, bitter. 3 years gone. How is that well? She tilted her head, eyes unreadable. Because you kept yourself. You'll still remember. That's more than most. I stared at the water. It lay flat, smug, as if it hadn't just claimed years of my life. Will it come again? I asked. Yes, she said softly. The book always comes again. She stood, fading into the fog. Be ready next time. I was alone on the plaza, the hum gone, replaced by an emptiness too large for my chest. I turned back toward shore, each step heavier, each breath sharper, the night colder. By the time I reached the gates, dawn had begun to pale the horizon. Birds stirred in the reeds. The town lay beyond, small and ordinary, unaware of the debt paid in its name. I walked the road back, 3 years lighter, 3 years poorer, and I told myself over and over, the only truth that mattered, I had chosen to remember, and that, for now, was enough. Thank you for listening. If this story kept you company tonight, consider liking the video and subscribing for more myths, legends, and gentle hauntings. Sleep well, and may the trails you choose lead you safely home.